We're ready for session 2. So if we want to have the moderator, Faiza Wahid, come up with the presenters for session 2, please. And while they're coming up, I just wanted to say a big thank you to our lunch sponsor. That was fantastic, Hardy Stevenson and Associates. And a quick plug again to ensure that everybody comes for the session, the social session tonight. Our session number 2, thanks to the silver sponsors, so Minogi, Dillon, GHD, and Wilms and Shire. And now I'll pass it on to Faiza.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone had a great lunch. Thank you so much to OAIA for the awesome lunch that we had today. Our first session after lunch, session number 2, is called Bringing It All Together, Streamlining Processes, Managing and Prioritizing Information, and Asking and Answering the Right Questions. We have 4 presenters in this session, a couple of great presentations, and I took a look at them. The first presentation is going to be from Sonya, Bubas, and Neal Smith. Sonya is a registered professional planner in Ontario and a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners with a Bachelor of Environmental Studies from the University of Waterloo. Sonya has over 2 decades of experience in environmental planning with emphasis on provincial and municipal class environmental assessments for transportation projects. She recently joined the City of Mississauga as a project leader in transportation and previously held roles as project manager and environmental planner in the public and private sectors. Presenting with her is Neal Smith, who is a project manager in the Region of Peel's Infrastructure Programming and Studies team with over 25 years of combined professional experience in both the municipal and private sectors, primarily in transportation engineering and transportation planning, completing environmental assessments, feasibility studies, and most recently, regional road corridor studies. Prior consulting experience included preparation of project proposals, resource and time management, project scheduling, and managing subconsultants, and ultimately detailed design, tendering, and construction. Welcome, Sonya and Neal. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. Thank you very much for the introductions and also for the opportunity to participate at this conference today. So earlier this year, I had the opportunity to review the proposed changes to the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act. And I noticed that municipal road projects, which is something that I work on a lot, appeared to be proposed to be not applicable to the EA Act in the future. And I'd love to hear some of your interpretations if you are familiar with the Act later, but that was my takeaway. So my initial reaction was negative. I thought, well, how do you assure or ensure consistency and environmental accountability if you don't have something like the Act to hold you accountable for? And of course, there's always a couple of people a little more smarter than you in the office, and I know I had a couple of people that had a different perspective, and they were very positive. So their outlook was, changes can be good. They could provide flexibility. They could provide flexibility in terms of how you plan your work, but doesn't necessarily have to hinder what you do. So as professionals, we have an obligation to meet other legislation to protect the environment. And a common priority among municipalities is that we work in ways that we think is in the best interest of the public. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that different perspective and positivity with you, and hopefully we can carry some of that through the presentation.
So to advance the slide, you can press green and then to go back if you want to use that.
Yes, please. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so just 1 second. Can I switch the sides on the laptop? Am I able to switch this here?
Yeah. And just go forward because it's already projecting. So you just go forward. Okay. That's to go forward.
And backward. Excuse me, sorry, technical difficulties.
The queen is to go forward, right? Next slide. She wants to go back.
I can go back one more? Yes. Okay, I apologize for that. No matter how much you try to prepare, there's always something you didn't prepare for. So I hope you can save us a minute on that. So just as an overview for our presentation today, we will first go over our interpretation and understanding of the proposed and approved changes to the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act, particularly as it relates to road projects. And we'll introduce our integrated or coordinated approach to road projects that are currently exempt under the EA Act. And for those of you who might be familiar with the Municipal Class EA process, we're not referring to the Integrated Planning Act and Environmental Assessment Act process. So just a note there. And then we'll provide a couple of examples of these projects in Peel and Mississauga. So to start, we must meet the requirements of the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act, which essentially helps us to conduct sound environmental planning and provide environmental protection. And we follow the Municipal Class EA process, which is approved under the EA Act, and it's a self-regulated process that helps us achieve the requirements of the Act for those routine projects that have a predictable range of impacts. And the Municipal Class EA focuses on roads, water and wastewater, and transit projects. And the Class EA is amended from time to time, and as David had mentioned earlier, it had been amended earlier this year in 2024. But the amendment that we're focusing on today is related to changes in March 2023. At that point in time, also mentioned this morning, projects were introduced to the Class EA that were exempt, and many of these projects were previously pre-approved under the EA Act. And what that meant for those projects was that, they might at least be subject to some kind of public notice, or they might at least be subject to public appeal in what was called bump-ups previously. But my understanding is that that currently is no longer in effect. So exempt projects are exempt from the EA Act altogether. And the proposed changes to the EA Act, I don't believe they've been approved yet, but the province is looking to replace the Municipal Class EA with a streamlined municipal project assessment process regulation. And for those of you, again, who might be familiar with the municipal class or familiar with EAs, for transportation, it would be something similar to the regulation currently in place for transit. So my takeaway from that is, as I mentioned at the beginning, is that it appears that road, or at least municipal road projects, would be exempt from the EA Act in the future. So from a municipal project planning perspective, we complete most of our EAs. We complete them mostly during the preliminary design stage of the project cycle. Basically, we're linking the broader transportation planning direction with the detailed design and implementation. And many times we're implementing, or at least taking the recommendations from master plans and assessing them at a local scale. So EAs are typically triggered by growth, or many times they're triggered by growth, in which we're focusing on road widening or extending a roadway to address the additional capacity that is needed. However, we also conduct corridor studies these days. And nowadays, corridor studies mainly apply to those projects that are exempt under the EA Act. They are very much focused on improvements within the existing road right-of-way. And they also focus on, rather than added capacity, they focus on multimodal shift. So enhancing facilities for alternative modes of travel, walking, cycling, and taking transit. And also integrating with that infrastructure assets and ensuring that they remain or that they are to optimal condition. So the focus of this presentation will be on corridor studies and not EAs. So at Peel and Mississauga, we are conducting corridor studies. And I actually, and a couple of people in the room have heard me say this too many times, but I worked for Peel for the half of the year, and now I'm working with Mississauga, both great, amazing places to work. But I still say we when we talk about Peel or Mississauga, so excuse me, I'm in transition. But at Peel Region, we had what was called complete corridor projects. So that was a corridor project that coordinated multiple improvements within the right-of-way. At the City of Mississauga, we have 3 types of corridor projects. First, we have the standalone road project, and that's focusing on one operational improvement. So, for example, if you need to add a right turn lane to an intersection, it's one improvement. We also have enhanced road projects, which focus on a couple of improvements within the corridor. For example, if we need to resurface a roadway, we may also be adding some street lighting. And the projects are managed separately, but they're coordinated together. And then we have integrated road projects. This is similar to Peel's complete corridor project, in that we have multiple infrastructure improvements that we're coordinating for one corridor. And that project is managed by an integrated road project manager. So how do we identify these corridors? Peel and Mississauga both look to their pavement rehabilitation programs to trigger a project. So when a road needs to be rehabbed or resurfaced, that triggers a project. At Peel, from my lens at the time as a project manager, what I saw happen was, we would have a pavement project, and that would provide the opportunity to consider what other council-approved items can be incorporated in the scoping package for that pavement project. So that could be recommendations for the same corridor from number of programs, including the region-wide intersection analysis, our sustainable transportation strategy, the State of Good Repair program, which are repairs or improvements to pavement, structures, storm sewers. We had a stormwater servicing master plan, and also a noise wall conversion program. So that would basically get developed into a terms of reference, and then we would, as project managers, review that terms of reference with internal and external stakeholders. At Mississauga, in a similar way, but slightly different, we have a list of upcoming pavement rehabilitation projects in the next 3 to 5 years. And that gets circulated internally to review, but also incorporate any additional needs for that corridor. And in a similar way, we look at similar components or criteria. It could be added active transportation infrastructure. It could be a bridge that needs to be repaired, some safety improvements, and also stormwater management, just to name a few. The list then gets vetted through a working group that meets quarterly, and their purpose is to prioritize the projects. We may have multiple projects in one year, we can't do it all, so they'll help prioritize that number down to a manageable list for the following year, and also to coordinate the budgets for those projects. And finally, the list is also coordinated or discussed with external agencies such as the Region of Peel and the Ministry of Transportation. So the characteristics of these projects: A, they are exempt from the EA Act. They have limited to no property impacts and also very minimal environmental impacts because they are mainly within the disturbed right-of-way. They have a high level of complexity and coordination because there are so many moving parts. And they have a medium to high profile. So many of these projects will be on an arterial or a major collector roadway with high traffic or high flow, and may also be within urban settings where the public interest is high. And so we also have significant public engagement. So even though the projects are exempt, it may not require in the future certain steps to be taken under the Act or the Class CA. We work for the public, and depending on the matters at play and the interest, we may have we may have 1 or 2 public meetings to several meetings, depending on that project. So there are 3 main objectives to these corridor studies. The first is to create a complete street that safely supports all modes of transportation for all ages and abilities. And so our primary messaging there is on safety alongside active movement. And the second objective is to maintain municipal infrastructure in a state of good condition and implement one coordinated plan for all corridor improvements. So by having one coordinated plan for all these improvements, we think we will save time and cost, but we will also minimize disruption to the community, because essentially we would have less construction impacts. So the projects we're speaking of do not have EA status. However, we do still need to plan our projects to protect the environment, to scope them for detailed design, and so on. And so we follow a very similar approach regardless. It's what we call, in quotations, an EA-like approach. So where we still determine, we start by determining the needs and the opportunities for the corridor. We identify and evaluate the environmental impacts of design concepts, and then prepare a preliminary plan that it also includes environmental commitments and mitigation. And alongside that, there are key decision points through that process where we will engage with internal and external stakeholders, the public, and Indigenous communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Neal, who's going to give you an example of a complete corridor study in Peel.
Thank you, Sonya. So the Highway 50 project for the region of Peel, this was the very first project that the region started as a corridor study. And of course, it had to be the most contentious and project to start with. This project was very contentious for a few reasons. Number one, it's situated in downtown Bolton, which is a major urban center for the town of Caledon. And you can see on the slides with the blue areas, as you can see on the photo, is a very steep grade in and a very steep grade out, with the main downtown core in the yellow area, which is the downtown Bolton. So the infrastructure requirements, first thing we do is we scope that project out, similar to, again, like we say, an EA-like project. We look at that corridor, we look at what the needs are, what the upgrade requirements are, such as cycling. We look at all the existing property accesses there and see if there's any way of improving those for access in and out. And we look at speed reduction if there's speeding issues. I think everybody has speeding issues, so we always look at measures we can do to reduce those. Street lighting upgrades, that would also include pedestrian lighting as well, but as Sonya mentioned, we are looking at it from a multimodal, and street lighting sometimes doesn't provide enough light for the AT facilities. Again, pavement resurfacing typically was the driver of this project. Well, while we're there, we wanted to make sure we looked at everything that we could do in there, do it all at once, and minimize impact to the community. Recently the region started to convert private noise walls into public noise walls. That was a very political process, but that's what we're doing now. And we always look for opportunities to improve green infrastructure, plant trees, plantings, all of those nice things. So through the consultant plan, we typically use a similar, like an EA process, where we do public notices. The notice typically, where we're doing these we don't do them right at the start of the project. We've been doing them till basically we use the same notice for the commencement of the project for the first public information center, because we're trying to condense the time of the project. We have virtually site meetings. We have the one public meeting, which was originally planned. We've since learned that with second public meeting is usually now looks like it's going to be required. Report circulations, public website seems to be a big thing that we do now, just with the age of technology. We still have our technical advisory committee meetings to look at our designs and what we're doing in these corridors. We complete walking audits now, which is an audit that's completed by Peel Health, so they're very involved in these studies as well from the health component. And we look at the safety, we look at all the different enhancements we can make, traffic operations, street parking. This project did have some street parking, so that also we had to take into consider as we went through this project. For this one, for the pedestrian and cycle, there's currently sidewalks, but that didn't help for the multimodal, so we're looking at upgrading those to multi-use paths or cycle tracks where if it through the design options. Separated bike lanes is something that we also look at as it's a downtown and lower speeds. Usually it's not for regional roads and high traffic roads, they're usually screened out. Use evaluation, similar again to the EA process. We complete a transportation report, traffic, make sure we have what's the current volume traffic out there and how that's going to tie into the overall project. Natural, cultural sides, and again, health community was involved. So the combined solution for this one was the downhill and uphill slides were are slated for a multi-use trail, but when we get down to the downtown core, they were looking at segregated bike lanes. And through the process and in consultation with the town of Calvin had just created a policy for summer barbecue season. So that we had to take into consideration as well, which then would include removing some parking to accommodate the patio program in the summer, but also how the bike lanes probably wouldn't work with that program. So we're actually looking at elevating it, making it into a cycle track. We're still in conversations on how to deal with the patio. We've had discussions on maybe putting signs up to have cyclists dismount and then walk through that section. It's about maybe 100 meters where this program would be in use. That's still in conversations now. Like Sonya had mentioned, we want to do a one time, one in and out. So we look at ways to do the speed reduction by reducing the lane is always the best thing because that also then provides opportunity to gain some more boulevard. We looked at private accesses to this corridor. Again, this was very political. All of the mini malls and the owners, they were very adamant that they prefer to maintain their own accesses, so we had to work around that. We did close one access that was kind of a joint access through a gas station into the mall, and there's been a few incidences there, so it made the most sense to look at closing that. Also, the green infrastructure, we're looking at some streetscaping, low impact development, which takes up some of the additional water from putting in multi-use trails. We increase the impervious area, so we need a way of dealing with that additional stormwater. Lessons learned to date, cost implications and the scoping requirements. We did a lot of the scoping when we did these packages because they're corridor studies on ODA. A lot of the studies, and we're working within a disturbed right-of-way, a lot of the items were provisional, and through the study we determined whether or not those studies were even needed, which was cost saving and was also helped with the schedule. Understanding the needs of internal and external. One we need to add to that was the political aspect. We had, because it's downtown Fulton, we had a lot of comments from the local ward councillor and also the mayor on what their vision is for that corridor, so we have to help do that. We've had several one-on-one meetings with a lot of the residents, the store owners wanting to know what's going on there as well. And understanding the coordinated approach. A lot of the consultants that are working are so used to doing EAs, they treat these corridor studies as EAs. And so we're trying to all train each other on these corridor studies and how we can quickly do these and expedite them. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sonya again for the blue project.
Thanks, Neal. So an example of an integrated road project in Mississauga was Bloor Street. This is a 4.5 kilometer road, existing 4 lanes in an urban setting. And the requirements in terms of infrastructure improvements the road required resurfacing. We're looking at safety improvements at intersections and for the road, rehabilitating a bridge, adding cycling facilities, and also noise walls. Other typical factors that were considered and that are typically considered for these type of projects included speed and lane reduction. In this particular case, our alternatives considered a reduction in the number of lanes to help with safety and speeding, and also to accommodate other travel modes such as cycling. And also consideration for reduced lane widths to also help to slow speeds down. And accessibility, drainage and stormwater management, streetscaping opportunities, and also utility and maintenance impacts. So from a consultation perspective, we had put out some traditional notices, coordinated with agencies such as the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, My Way Transit, Peel Region, the Conservation Authority, the interested public and local residents. And what we had heard, we heard, I guess, questions and concerns on the topics related to active transportation and traffic operations, and for this project, particularly the trade-offs between providing active transportation and reducing the number of lanes. There were also questions to do with speeding, sightline at driveways, noise levels, and utilities and maintenance. We had looked at alternative facilities in the corridor, ones that affected the cross-section as well. So, for example, we looked at one-way cycle tracks on both sides of the road with both 2 or 4 lanes, separated bike lanes on both sides with a reduction to 2 lanes, and 2-way cycle tracks on either side with the 4 lanes. The facilities or alternatives were evaluated based on transportation and environmental criteria and conformance with policies and plans. And we also had considered public input. And with that, we had a recommendation for a reduced cross-section to 2 traffic lanes with cycle tracks on both sides of the road. We also had looked for opportunities and recommended multiple locations where there were new pedestrian crossings, signalized crossings, and in this particular location there was a crossing or a trail crossing right next to a creek. Trail users could go over or under the bridge, and the improvements made here were to encourage trail users to go over the bridge, as going under was not as advantageous because that area was or has been prone to spring flooding. So some of the lessons that were learned on this project are related to project timelines. We plan the projects out 2 to 3 years in advance of construction because they can take a little longer than expected. As was mentioned in one of the presentations this morning, we still do a lot of investigation and works and public consultation. We have approved documents where we get guidance, such as transportation master plans and Vision Zero, and oftentimes the public will disagree with that guidance, and so we may have to vet more alternatives than we originally anticipated. From a consultation approach perspective, we are messaging the importance of safety next to active transportation. And in terms of funding, with integrated road projects, we have one line item in our budget now for those projects as opposed to multiple sources of project funding. And with respect to external consultants, I think both now at Peel and Mississauga, we've tried to conduct some of these studies in-house. It's a little more work than we expected, so we need some help, and we do work with consultants on these assignments. So, future considerations, we'd like to leverage the use of GIS tools. We do have those tools that are very helpful. However, there may be some ways that we can use it in order to query some data that can help us prioritize projects. And we can always improve our consultation and increase our integration with stakeholders, some of them being the utilities, some of them also being internal, works and transportation, Indigenous communities earlier on in the project. That concludes our presentation. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Sorry, I'm going to turn off my alarm so it doesn't go off when I'm introducing the next set of speakers. You both were great on time. Thank you. So who knew all of the things that went into a corridor redevelopment? And sort of sounds like an EA, but there's so much work that happens on the ground, and I know there's going to be a lot of questions about that for both Sonya and Neal. Thank you both so much. Okay, so our next set of speakers are Katrina and Jasmine. So I'll do a quick introduction for them, and you can come up here. Katrina is one of GHD's leading community engagement practitioners in Canada. She has dedicated the last 16 years to helping public and private sector organizations create lasting community benefit through meaningful stakeholder engagement. As a trained member of the International Association of Public Participation, Katrina has led community engagement programs for waste, wastewater, water, transportation, and transit environmental assessments in Ontario and internationally. Jasmine is an environmental planner and engineer for water and wastewater infrastructure projects at Jacobs. Jasmine has more than 5 years of experience with the infrastructure planning, design, and construction sectors, working directly with municipalities across Ontario to implement large-scale infrastructure planning assessments, including Schedule B and C environmental assessments and master servicing plans, making her proficient with the municipal class EA process, Environmental Assessment Act, and implementation of federal, provincial, local regulatory requirements related to infrastructure and planning capital projects. With that said, the title of their presentation is York Region Sewage Works Project Report, a case study for Streamlined IA.
Thank you. Okay, so Katrina and I are pretty excited to share some information about an initiative that was recently completed that not only addresses critical infrastructure needs in both York and Durham regions, but it also aligns with the province's commitments to sustainable growth and environmental stewardship. So in November of 2022, the Ontario government enacted the More Homes Built Faster Act, I think more commonly known as Bill 23. This legislation is a cornerstone of the province's long-term strategy to significantly increase housing supply. Sorry, I should have switched my slide there, in Ontario. An essential element of this act is Schedule 10. This is the Supporting Growth and Housing in Both York and Durham Regions Act. This mandates the expansion and enhancement of the existing York-Durham sewage system, also known as the YDSS, to convey wastewater from communities in both York and Durham regions to the Duffin Creek Water Pollution Control Plant. Jacobs and GHD were tasked with the following: identify upgrades and expansion requirements that would convey wastewater from communities across York and Durham regions to the Duffin Creek Water Pollution Control Plant with the ultimate goal of safely discharging treated effluent into Lake Ontario. And although that may seem like a standard Jacobs or GHD project, the challenge was, based on the ministry's mandate as part of Bill 23, this would have to be completed in an eight-month turnaround time in the absence of typical EA directions. So to meet these objectives, together Jacobs and GHD worked with York and Durham to develop the York Region Sewage Works Project Report. 27 different project components were identified across the YDSS as requiring upgrades, expansion, or rehabilitation over the next 20+ years to meet the projected growth numbers that were identified in Bill 23. These projects would help to enhance capacity, ensure resiliency against potential system failure, operational flexibility, etc. Early coordination between Jacobs and GHD was imperative to ensure that our approach would be consistent across all of the individual projects identified. One of the key aspects of our approach was to treat this project as a streamlined environmental assessment process. While Bill 23 introduced some challenges by mandating a timeline that was atypical for a standard EA or an impact assessment, it also provided us an opportunity to innovate our methodology. We embraced a proactive stance, ensuring that we met the environmental requirements set out in legislation, such as the Environmental Assessment Act, while prioritizing consultation efforts. The York Region Sewage Works Project report has been instrumental in enabling us to reevaluate how we conduct environmental impact assessments. By identifying ways to optimize the process, we have been able to combine various project components, ensuring that environmental due diligence is maintained through a more holistic, program-level approach. Importantly, this focus on integration of project components does not actually compromise the quality of our deliverables. Rather, it allows us to maintain high standards in our deliverables while still adhering to the necessary timelines. Throughout this initiative, our team prepared an impressive volume of technical work, I think about 60 to 70 technical memos in the short 7 or 8 months that we worked on this, each crafted and coordinated across the different project components to address various aspects of the project. This slide here shows the various chapters that were developed as part of the final project report submission, where chapters 1 to 3 and 11 and 12 combine some high-level background and implementation information for all of the projects identified, and chapters 4 to 10 showcased a summary of the technical memos that we completed for each. The substantial body of work was collaboratively reviewed by both York and Durham regions, exemplifying the strength of our partnership in this project. While this was not a traditional environmental assessment, the rigorous nature of our undertaking did require detailed evaluations, reflecting our commitment to transparency and accountability. Each project component identified environmental, social, and technical impacts associated with the project, as well as mitigation measures for each. As part of our program-level approach, I'm reading some notes here and I'm confusing myself. Some of the individual studies were integrated based on the study areas for various project components to aid in our streamlined assessment. Other studies, such as archaeology or cultural heritage, maintained a site-specific approach, ensuring that all of the information relevant to the individual study area was cataloged and assessed appropriately. In our consultations, we engaged with several stakeholders, including local municipalities, TRCA, the Ministry of the Environment, and various Indigenous communities. These discussions were instrumental in identifying potential environmental impacts along with necessary mitigation measures. By prioritizing stakeholder engagement, we ensured that diverse perspectives were incorporated into our planning process, reinforcing our commitment to inclusivity and comprehensive decision-making. Katrina will touch more on how consultation was conducted and its impact throughout this project a little bit later in this presentation. As we transition from the project report submission into the preliminary design phase for some of our projects, I think Katrina and I are both proud to report that we have done so seamlessly. The urgency of growth in our regions is really driving the schedule for these projects, and we are dedicated to progressing the identified project components into future design and construction stages while maintaining the commitments that were outlined in our project report. Before I pass it over to Katrina, I'm just going to finish with this. The York Region Sewage Works project is not just a regulatory response. It represents a significant investment in the infrastructure that underpins our communities. We are laying the groundwork for a resilient future, one where we can accommodate growth while safeguarding the environment. The work we are undertaking is a reflection of our shared vision for a sustainable development in Ontario. By treating our process as a streamlined environmental assessment while maintaining best practices for consultation, we are not only meeting regulatory requirements, but also fostering a collaborative approach that benefits all stakeholders. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Katrina to talk a bit more about consultation efforts.
Thanks, Jasmine. So I'll talk briefly first, very briefly, about what the Act specified in terms of consultation, and I'll talk briefly about it because there wasn't a lot of detail in the Act in terms of consultation and how the Ministry expected it to be done. So in terms of how consultation was undertaken, the Act specified that York and Durham regions must consult with Indigenous nations and quote-unquote persons who may be interested in the project. The minister identified the Indigenous communities that they believed may have Aboriginal or treaty rights that may be adversely impacted by the project. So here, similar to an EA, the ministry retained that duty to consult and delegated the procedural aspects to that to the regions. In terms of what consultation, what we were consulting on, Very little detail in terms of interested persons. All it really said was to make the project report publicly available on the region's websites. In terms of Indigenous nations, providing the report to Indigenous nations, but the Act did go further, and this is where it looks more familiar to what we might typically see in an EA, where there was a requirement to discuss with Indigenous nations Aboriginal or treaty rights that may be impacted, potential adverse impacts, and measures that may avoid or mitigate those impacts, including any measures identified by the community. But certainly this was a lot less detail than what we're used to seeing in the EA Act or codes of practice or any of the municipal or Class EA's guidance. The Act also specified how consultation would be documented. The only thing really unique here is that they required 2 distinct consultation summary reports, one for Indigenous communities and one for interested persons. The content of that report, again, very similar to what we might typically prepare in an EA. But again, here you'll see what was unique in the Act was a much more deliberate distinction between Indigenous nations and interested persons. So there was a very distinct process, and that was very clearly defined in the Act, that those were different consultation processes. In terms of ministerial approval, similar to an individual EA or a comprehensive EA, this was not a self-assessment process. The minister did retain that approval authority. So Jasmine mentioned the aggressive timeline. So the consultation on the project report really took place. It started in January of 2023, including the review. It lasted until March of this year, so around about 10 months, including that review period. Project report was submitted at the end of March, and the minister approved it in about 30 days, just about a month. So, with lacking that direction from the minister, it really left us to kind of sit back and say, okay, well, so what makes sense in terms of consultation on this project? So in terms of interested persons, I'll talk about that first. The start of the project report consultation process looked very similar to what we might do in an EA. There was a project notice in the newspapers, websites, that kind of thing, introductory letters to agencies and local municipalities. But from there, it was really a tailored approach, and this was similar to what I'll talk about with Indigenous nations as well. It was really what makes sense for consultation with that participant. So for agencies, for most agencies, that meant a couple of sets of meetings. We did introductory meetings to explain the project, and then later on in the process, before the project report was submitted, we walked through the conceptual design with them, and then provided them the conceptual design drawings, and they had an opportunity to review and comment on those before they were submitted. On the impacts and mitigation, but it really was kind of dependent on each individual agency. There was no, we were prepared to do more public consultation and more public engagement, but we really didn't get a lot of response from the public or from local interest groups, so there was we felt that there wasn't a need to do a public information center, for example. So again, this is where I actually liked that there was a lot of flexibility in the process to tailor the engagement approach to what was actually needed for the project. In terms of Indigenous nations, I think the consultation approach differed in a couple of key ways from what we see as a status quo. First of all, York and Durham regions committed to meaningfully engage Indigenous nations early and for them to help shape the project report. We didn't have a very rigid plan at the beginning like we might, and that was very uncomfortable for us planners. We didn't have a lot of, we didn't know exactly what consultation was going to look like when we entered into this process. I think someone earlier said we dived in and we started trying things out. And we met with people, and we heard from them how they wanted to be engaged and how they wanted to be involved in the process. Engagement was also framed within a larger context, so it wasn't just about this project or this project report. We only had a fairly short period of time to talk about this project report, so the commitments for future consultation and the discussion about York and Durham region's relationship with nations beyond this project became really important. So for example, in terms of commitments, there was a request for additional marine archaeological work at Duffin Creek Water Pollution Control Plant. So as part of the project report, there wouldn't have been enough time during the project report to do that, but TMHC and Matrix put together a work plan that was circulated and reviewed and agreed to by the nations, and then that work plan is baked into those commitments for that kind of post-project report work. And finally, I think we kind of flipped, I think we flipped the conversation. So we tried not to put the onus on, and this is kind of building the discussion earlier, we tried not to put the onus on First Nations to fit their interests into the project and into a process that may not fit their interests, but we really tried to understand what their concerns were and what their interests were, and then the onus was on us to figure out how that related to the project. So my perspective is that this was an improvement from past consultation processes and kind of that status quo. I think it is a bit of a mindset shift, and certainly we applied lessons learned from previous projects like the Upper York Sewage Solutions, for example. Of course, I cannot speak for the nations and how they feel. Probably this process wasn't perfect. I think it's hopefully moving in the right direction. And again, the important thing here is the commitments, right? There's only so much, commitments are just words. So I think time will tell as we're moving into detailed design now. We need to put those words into action, and York and Durham region need to put those words into action. So in terms of functionally what that consultation looked like, as I said, it was a very tailored approach. So we did the standard, we did notification, letter, emails, telephone calls at the beginning to understand who was interested and how they wanted to be engaged. And then for each nation, it was a tailored approach based on what they were interested in. So for all nations, we did updates at key milestones. Again, we didn't do blanket emails. We made sure to do individual emails. We did one-on-one meetings or group meetings, review of archaeological reports. So the nations that were more interested and more involved included Mississauga of Scugog Island, Alderville First Nation, Hiawatha First Nation, and Chippewa of Rama. So they were involved in different aspects of the project, including the archaeological, cultural heritage, review of the project report. This photo here is a site visit of Duffin Creek Water Pollution Control Plant that we did with Scugog Island First Nation. And what that resulted in, again, I talked about the importance of commitments. So there was, we're moving into design now. As I said, it was just approved in April, so we're at the beginning of the detailed design process. Now, there was commitments to, of course, further archaeological assessments, participation in field investigations and monitoring. There was some concerns around archaeological impacts during construction in areas that may already be disturbed. So there was a commitment for an archaeological risk management plan. I talked about the marine archaeological assessment. So again, that was a commitment to do that and to incorporate traditional knowledge and community-specific knowledge. There was a commitment to continue to work with Scugog Island First Nation on aspects of the design that potentially impacted Aboriginal or treaty rights. And then in terms of interested persons, it's more of the typical ongoing public communication, engagement with agencies based on permits and that kind of thing. And the MECP does continue to be somewhat involved. The regions are required to report progress to the ministry moving forward. So that's it for us. Happy to talk about the project. I know it's a very big project and it's a very long history, but thank you for having us, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Awesome. I have a very easy job today as a moderator with an awesome set of presenters who are sticking to the time before I even can tell them their time's up. So, with that said, we're going to open up the floor for questions, and I know that you have a lot. And please come up to the microphones and ask questions.
I'll kick it off with an intro question here. It's just, Sonya, you said near the beginning, you talked about the changes to the MEC process and what do we think of roads not being in them anymore. Well, many of us are EA practitioners, so I was pretty surprised to see that as a proposal out there. Clearly, good EA planning or planning can be done in the absence of that, but I do have to wonder sort of what the thought process was by having that potentially removed from the municipal class EA. To me, it seems rather arbitrary. Why not remove water, wastewater? Anyways, I think what we've seen here in these presentations was good work can be done in the absence of these frameworks, but I worry about maybe some of the smaller municipalities that maybe think, oh, well, we don't need to do this anymore. Like, we can get to the project faster and spend less money. So that's my perspective.
Thank you. I appreciate your perspective. I can't speak on behalf of the ministry in terms of the thought process. I think it is communicated that's somewhat linked to, wanting to, we have quite a lot of population coming, we have housing targets and trying to build the infrastructure in a more efficient, effective way as possible. We may agree or disagree with that. But I do agree with you. I still think the Act is a strong tool or mechanism to hold municipalities accountable throughout Ontario on our municipal road planning. So, that comment was still put forward on behalf of Peel at the time, but it's also balanced with the idea that, we have to remember we do work in the public's best interest. We are professionals, right? And with every profession, whether you're a planner, engineer, environmental practitioner, you do have obligations from that standpoint. So there is a little bit of fate in that. And I know from working at both Peel and Mississauga now, albeit they're not small municipalities, so I take your point, I do hear it. But, I see firsthand, they're very consistent in taking that seriously. So thank you for your comment. I don't disagree, but those are just some additional things to think about.
Sorry, can I just add on to that the ministry will be here tomorrow morning and they'll give us our presentation, so maybe we can pose some of those questions to them, but not scare them away so they don't come next year as well. And I mean, the idea is just formulating, but I also do want to say that the Municipal Engineers Association is working to fill that gap. For some of these projects no longer adhering to the municipal class EA, and that is something that can help those smaller municipalities. So stay tuned for more about that in the coming months.
Thank you, Violetta. I did hear that, and many of you may have read it as well. I think they're looking to, if that came to fruition, I read that they were looking to put together a standard or some type of guideline that would also be a mechanism to hold municipalities accountable to a process of some kind. Thank you.
And that's a lot of, it becomes very important in the context of Bill 23, and especially for those outer, smaller municipalities as well, where we're going to see huge boom in growth and development. So, your question.
My question is also for Sonya. When you were speaking of this sort of EA-like process being implemented in Mississauga, is that just to sort of live at kind of the staff operational policy level, or is it the sort of thing that would actually be kind of entrenched in the official plan, or as a sort of defined model?
Right now, I think it's at a staff policy level. I do have a boss that sits right behind you, and he can nod yes or no. Nod yes or no. If I'm right or wrong, let me know, Jeff. But I mean, it's practice. It's practice for staff to follow in our integrated group where we do these EAs and integrated projects for transportation. I don't believe, if I understand the question correctly, I don't believe it's something that's integrated into like a official plan policy or. And I also think similar processes are followed for the transportation master plan, right? The public consultation and looking at alternatives. Does that answer your question, though?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Before we go to your question, I do have one question that I didn't want to jump up with, and I'm already here, so I might as well. Neal, you mentioned that you do work pretty closely with field public health, and you talked about the walking audits that they did for the project as well.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask more broadly, and as you're doing the planning for these types of projects that don't really go through any regulatory framework, how closely do you plan to work with your health department?
This started a few years ago, back when I think it was on 26 when we started doing, where I did a major EA, and the first involvement where we actually created a matrix where we looked at the benefits of what we're constructing, what that benefits have on people's health. We had our public health where they did the demographics and showed where this area of Peel is a very high in diabetes, so any project in that area should really be focusing on active transportation. So that was a big component. And again, that's carrying over now in the last 8 or 9 years now, where we're doing these walking audits where we bring in different perspectives. We'll bring in a counselor would come in, we'd have residents, seniors, kids from school, we'd have all different perspectives to see what does this corridor, when you use this corridor, what's it look like, how can we make it better? What are your safety concerns? And we take all that information, incorporate it into the study, and it helps the project run a lot smooth from an active transportation component for sure.
Awesome, thank you. So everyone heard that, right? Yeah. In the context of Bill 23, the recent public policy about cycling lanes and all of this, development growth that we're going to have. Yes, we need to expand, but these are things that are really important to consider. Health of communities, healthy communities, as we grow and expand. Sorry, your question, please.
Sure, thank you very much, and thanks so much for these real-life projects. My question was, with the emphasis on a more compressed schedule, and I guess for both of these really important initiatives and large-scale projects, do you see more of the work moving into an interagency discussions, commitments to those? Do you see a lot more of that moving to the detailed design stage? And with that, any thoughts on how you can still achieve the best community and ecological benefits through those discussions, with those agency discussions? And I'm coming at it a little bit biased. I'm with the TRCA. Want to make sure that we continue to try to make those positive impacts where we can while you're upgrading infrastructure or doing that. So that's my question.
I guess I could start off from the region's perspective. The consultational part is, even though like I say, we're doing this EA, like the consultation, I think, in my personal opinion, is actually more consultation now than we had in the EA, because the EA we had a process. Now it's like we have a wide open concept where we want to hear everybody's opinion. And we've heard, even internally, we've had internal meetings on how this affects them. And they're very adamant that continue what we used to do, because they want all the planning done through the EA. They want all the permit requirements to be done to the EA, so that when they go to detailed design, they can accelerate the detailed design and not have to go back and revisit consultation. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And we actually had a conversation not too long ago that the Indigenous nations, even though we're trying to get all that communication done at the study, they've made it amateur. They want to be involved with the detailed design process as well, and that just came out this week actually. So that's good for us to know, because we can, through our planning, we can actually set our detailed design team up with what they need to do when they get to that point.
I'll add to that in terms of the York Sewage project, I think the level of design that we got to during the project report was similar to an EA. It was conceptual design, so I think the kind of the level of detail in terms of comments from agencies was similar to an EA in that respect, and a lot of the more detailed comments would be addressed during detailed design, whether it was in this project or in an EA. What we didn't mention is that there was no evaluation of alternatives in this process. There was alternatives to, or alternative solutions or alternative methods. So I think if there is a need for consultation on that side of it, that would certainly have to be done. I mean, this was a fairly unique process. I'm not sure if it would be replicated, but if it is, and that consultation would have to occur, then it would have to be kind of before the process even starts.
Yeah, and I guess the last part, and I know you were going to say something too. Sorry.
It's really just to echo and supplement their comments, because we consistently, whether it's corridor or EA studies, we go to that level of detail to 30% design. And the part of the idea is to make sure we have a concept that can be implemented, right? And that we identify as much as possible in terms of impacts, mitigation, permitting requirements. We try to get approvals in principle, right, from our agencies like yourselves at conservation authorities. We try to set the project up for success at that point. So when we transfer it on to detailed design, they're able to really implement it in a responsible way. So, and they like that. I think that detailed design groups like that. So I don't think more will go over to detailed design. I think we'll probably consistently keep this level of detail, but that's my guess at this point. That's what we're still doing.
I'd just like to add to the point too, when it comes to the TRCA and CBC and the conservation authorities, is we are restricted to our existing right-of-way. We're not stepping outside of our footprint. So that really simplifies the work that we have with the conservation authorities as well, because we're not really making much in the way of impacts, other than, like I said, the impervious area may change from a sidewalk to a multi-use trail, which we're trying to implement LAD. So.
Yeah, and on that, and I'm just thinking, knowing that very steep track of land and all the trails connected to it. I mean, do you ever, as a practitioner, do you note things that are outside of your scope but potential opportunities, connections? Are you doing that in other corridor studies, or is that something that as practitioners we should be doing more of? More of a question. I know it's not your immediate scope and immediate budget, and we have to be careful of scope leap, creep, all those things. But is that something that came up in that project? You mentioned the opportunities for fitness or dealing with physical health and connectivity and things like active transportation. Was that anything that came out of your study? Connections or anything like that? Or?
Well, we do look at the connections for sure. Mm-hmm. That's a big part of the project as well. And like I say, we look for the environment. We look, we go farther to point of we make sure we're incorporating some rest areas and, right. All of those different things. If there's creeks or trails within there, make sure there's opportunity, because everybody likes to walk creeks and all those kind of things that, try and make it an aesthetically a nice corridor as well. So that's also incorporated into the study.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'll let up. Thank you.
Your question.
Hi, thanks. Katrina, this question's for you. I'm very interested in what you did with the archaeology work with communities. How many communities did you have involved? Because it's quite, everything from Newmarket to Durham. And then the second question as part of that is, did you do any TEK as part of that? In our work I know is stage 1 or stage 2, so that's very archaeologically linked to the Heritage Act. But did you go with the communities and do any TEK as well?
Yeah, so I should know off the top of my head which nations were engaged. There was about a dozen, all of the Williams Treaty's First Nations primarily. So in terms of archaeological, it was almost all of the projects. It was only a stage 1 that was done. Mm-hmm. So no field work. There was one case, and it was actually technically outside of the scope of the project, but there was one stage 2 that was done at Duffin Creek, and that's where Chippewa of Rama provided field monitors for that. So all of the stage 1 reports, the nations had the opportunity to review those. In some cases, it was quite extensive reviews, and there was a lot of back and forth to ensure that those reports got to a place that nations were satisfied with them being submitted to the ministry, to MCM for approval. In terms of TEK, there wasn't anything specifically during the project report. I think the closest thing, I think we're getting there, and I'm not a TEK expert, but there is a request for a marine archaeological assessment, potentially including underwater archaeology in the area of Duffin Creek, and the work plan for that specifically includes collection of Indigenous knowledge and histories about how Indigenous peoples use that area around and continue to use that area around Duffin Creek. So I think that that's coming as part of that work.
Okay, thank you.
Alvin?
This question is for Katrina. How does one go about changing the information that you provided today in terms of inviting is a lot different than engaging? And the words I saw were invite, and it goes to everyone. When I was working as a political person for our community, my job was rights and resources, and they started this type of work at that time, and we'd get like 1,000, and there'd only be 8 of us that could work on it, and we were all only when we had spare time. So if language could be changed to make it a stronger engagement and compensation to the First Nation, would help all parties. So my question is, how do you change that?
Yeah, your comment is well taken, and I was using the word invite as indicating that first step. So me sending an email or a letter is not engagement, right? That's just the first step, and then it's up to the proponent and the Indigenous nation to define, or up to the nation, define what engagement or consultation looks like from there. So I think that's where I'm careful to say that that one-way dialogue is not necessarily engagement. And in terms of, I think what we try to do is, the typical approach is we send out blanket emails. If we don't get a response, we move on, right? That doesn't work anymore. We know that that's not satisfactory. So if a nation came to us several months after we started, that's fine. We have to go back. We have to walk them through, start at the beginning and see where we can engage in the process, because we understand that capacity is a significant factor, and capacity funding does not always address that issue.
I guess I was going to the point that often proponents will compensate and engage, and I know people in this room who participate in that, but municipalities and little towns, they don't have the concern that you guys are getting. So how do we change the language so they are directed to do this?
The difficult thing that I've always struggled with is that I said it's a mindset shift, and it really is. It has to come from inside, right? It has to come from inside the individual project manager that is in that process. And if it's not there, if that commitment's not there, and if that understanding isn't there, then you're right. That's where kind of the accountability comes in. You can't force that. So I don't know. I mean, I struggle with that as well. There has to be some accountability. But at the end of the day, that's not the same as, the cultural shift or the mindset shift that we need to see. I totally agree.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see there's no other questions. I think with that, does anyone have any last thoughts, comments they want to share? Okay, awesome. I think we're done. Please, big round of applause for all our presenters.
So we're on to session 3. We've got 2 more sessions. We're going to carry on from session 3 right into session 4. So we won't have a break. And then we'll have some closing remarks. Starting with session 3 here now, we wanted to thank the Indigenous sponsor, Hatch. And I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for this session, Kevin Hanna.
Great. Thanks very much. Really interesting session ahead of us, and each of our presenters is going to have about 20 minutes, and then there's time for a Q&A, as with the other sessions. My name's Kevin Hanna. I'll be the moderator today, and it's a pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed the presentations this morning. I'm not going to read a laborious biography of each, not that they're laborious, but long biography of each presenter. There's a really good set of bios in the program, so please take a moment to have a look at that to learn more about our presenters and their work. So I want to welcome Jeremiah Pariag to the podium, and I'm going to queue up your talk. Just a sec here. This one. This one. Great.
What do we need to do? I gotcha.
Okay. So, yeah, sorry, that's my fault.
That's okay.
Good, good. So good to go. It's up now.
It's up now?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
You should be good.
And this just cool. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming back from lunch to hear a little bit about relationships as being a critical path for project delivery. My name is Jeremiah Pariag. I'm just going to tell everyone a little bit about myself before we get into the presentation. So I have a couple of different roles at HDR, and I want to be really clear about which role I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of today. So at HDR, I am one of our consultation and engagement leads. That's a role where I am mainly working with the public, working with stakeholders on a number of different issues that they might have on projects. I'm also the Indigenous engagement practice lead at HDR. I want to be really clear that the material I'm presenting today is not related to that portion of my role. So today I mainly am going to be focusing on stakeholder engagement and public engagement and how relationships are core to that. I also teach environmental planning at Western University, and much of what we're talking about today is what we're seeing sort of emerging as being key questions coming up from younger planners as well, and planners who are going to be entering the field very, very shortly to work on impact assessment projects. In terms of the presentation structure for today, it's going to be fairly straightforward. I'm going to go through an introduction and an overview. We're going to chat about some emerging trends in engagement. And lastly, we're also going to be talking about engagement techniques that can also be used to help manage politicization that's been occurring on projects, like I'm sure a number of us have seen. Just 1 second, apologies.
Sorry. That's strange.
Okay, there we go. Perfect, thank you. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is that engagement is changing. When we were working on consultation and engagement projects 10, even 5 years ago, things were very, very different. Politicization has really been increasing across projects, and we've seen a lot of external elements really starting to influence projects in a way that a lot of people may not have necessarily anticipated. A lot of this is due to social media. We've seen the rise of social media and the more recent emerging of social media to impact projects and also media consumption patterns, really adapting and really changing. And a lot of the times those are impacting the projects that we work on. The impact of this is that very often, and in my experience, more often than not, we're finding that the perception of projects actually matters more than the project itself. And this is leading to projects becoming more and more contentious because in the planning space, in the impact assessment space, a lot of us aren't exactly ready yet to think about the perception of the project being more impactful to the project than maybe some of the technical details that we all might be familiar with. And again, I just want to clarify that engagement has really adapted and it's really evolved from a procedural step to a fundamental aspect of project success. We're going to talk about project viability and the impact that engagement plays in that. But the main takeaway from this slide that I want to share is that when projects are more politicized, when they're more scrutinized, when they're more contentious, the strength of our relationships that we build on those projects with the public and with stakeholders really is the determining factor for us to actually have that project be viable and continue moving on with it. When we're talking about the role of engagement, I'm sure we all have different definitions for it. The way that I like to often think about it is that it's the process, again, of involving regulators, stakeholders, the public, and Indigenous communities and other key parties in essentially a way that allows for two-way information sharing on a project. When we're thinking about what leads to effective engagement, there's a lot of pillars that you'll hear. There's 4 that we're finding now to be more relevant than ever before. Inclusivity is a main one. Inclusivity has not always been a core element of engagement. Typically when we were doing engagement programs maybe 10 years ago or so, whoever would show up at the public meeting might be the people who would guide the process of that engagement. Transparency is another factor there. By that I mean openly sharing public details and being able to effectively work with people in an open and honest way is really what's going to guide your process. Consistency is also something that we need to be paying more attention to. By consistency, I mean being there throughout the life cycle of a project, not just at key engagement checkpoints. And lastly, anticipation. By anticipation, we mean understanding what issues might arise in the future as well, and not just responding retroactively as situations come up, but instead thinking about what issues might come up in the future. The outcome of this is that projects that prioritize engagement are more likely to gain stakeholder support and reduce those risks very early on in a project. We talked a lot about project viability and buy-in, and one line that I do want to draw is that there is a direct link between your engagement program and how viable your actual project is as well. And the fact of the matter is that a lack of proper engagement and buy-in might actually jeopardize your entire project. There is that direct link to success. There's also the need to build community supports on projects as well. Projects that genuinely incorporate community feedback into them, those projects tend to face less resistance, and those are the projects that tend to generate that longer term buy-in that we're all trying to get across our projects. What we are seeing is that across the infrastructure sector, companies that are integrating that stakeholder feedback into their actual project planning, they're actually experiencing a smoother implementation process and fewer delays. The benefit of that is that these projects end up costing less in the long run because you're being able to handle all of your key stakeholder concerns early on. And in later phases of the project, when your design is actually representative of the community you're working in, we are finding a lot more buy-in. Politicization, though, as I mentioned, is something that's changed projects pretty significantly. Political dynamics are something that can significantly impact project timelines. They can also impact regulatory approvals and funding. We've seen a lot of this in the energy sector for those who've done a lot of projects in that space. We are seeing this, though, expand into areas like transit, like water, wastewater as well. And a lot of this boils down to public opinion as essentially being a driver for how people think about a project. The alignment or misalignment of projects with political agendas can also drastically shift their direction and even lead to a project being canceled. The politicization trend is a reality across many sectors, and that makes it really crucial for practitioners in the engagement space specifically to really work with stakeholders in early stages of the project so that they can understand what those impacts might be. There's also a need for upfront investment. There's often hesitation to spend the funds required to engage with the public robustly very early on in a project. However, what we've been finding is that if you're not making the upfront investment to actually do that engagement early on in a project, there's going to be negative opinion, public opinion later on in the project, and that can actually lead, again, to your projects being canceled or delayed or getting more profile than maybe they should have. As I mentioned earlier, social media plays a huge part in this. Everything that you can think of between X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you'll even see a lot of political opinions on LinkedIn now, which is something that's started in the last maybe 5 to 8 years or so. This is creating a lot of significant impacts on projects. We're getting real-time reactions to infrastructure projects, to planning projects that maybe we weren't seeing a few years ago. We're also seeing some projects going viral, for example, as well. Projects in the transit space, in the energy space, in the private development space, we're seeing those projects starting to trend more on social media. And when that happens, it not only impacts the project as a whole, but has an impact on the teams working on that project. It means that there's an additional need for people to adapt on that project, to work on their messaging, to understand how public perception is playing a role, and how how practitioners on that project can work on the messaging to actually make it more reflective of the reality of those projects as well. Managing misinformation is something that's been a trend for about, well, forever, but on a lot of planning and in fact assessment projects, mainly over the last 5 to 8 years or so, it's gotten to a level that we may not have seen before. Misinformation is something that is existent on so many projects in so many areas, whether again, you're in the transit space, you're in the energy space, you're in the water space, and social media and conflicting traditional media reporting can tend to paint projects in a negative light. You'll often see things on social media talking about the nefarious side of projects that may or may not be real. But you'll have people alluding to backdoor political deals. You'll see people extrapolating details that might not be reflective of reality on projects. And again, all of this plays a big role on our projects because at the end of the day, if we're working on something that needs approval for a piece of vital infrastructure, for example, it is really necessary that we understand where that pushback sometimes is coming from or where that misinformation is stemming from. The impacts on projects from that is pretty clear. The project concerns that you're going to hear from the public, that you're going to hear from the stakeholders, they're not sometimes rooted in reality. And that's something that a lot of people are still trying to adapt to now. A lot of us, I'm sure, have faced misinformation on our projects, whether that's misinformation related to climate change or something else. Very often, it's very difficult to understand how to respond to some of those stakeholder or public concerns, especially when they are not rooted in reality. And again, people who sometimes bring those views to the table on planning projects or impact assessment projects, they sometimes are harder to communicate with and require a lot more proactive planning to be able to come up with those mitigation solutions very, very early on to be able to understand how to better communicate with them. But what we're seeing here is that the mere concept of some projects can be targeted by groups. So sometimes you'll see development projects right now, for example, being in the news quite a bit because there's been an association with private development projects and some of the money that's used for that quote-unquote lining developers' pockets, or you'll hear about energy projects, for example, with contracts going to companies that the media sometimes or social media will paint as being, again, nefarious. Sometimes, even when you start on a project now, you're realizing that, and we are realizing that those projects have a higher chance of being targeted, which means that our planning for how to mitigate that targeting needs to happen much, much sooner. Perception management, like I said, is make or break for a lot of the projects that we work on. And again, I really do believe that it is more important than the reality of the project itself a lot of the time. When we're trying to shape a positive perception of our project, or I even should say, an accurate perception of a project in the public eye, we really look at proactive storytelling. We want to be able to share stories that highlight the project benefits and its alignment with community values. Sometimes that's going to mean engaging with the community very, very early on to understand exactly what the benefit or impact from that project is going to be. Now I think too, in the planning space in particular, addressing misinformation is something that's core to what a lot of planners are doing. Very often now we're countering false information with clear, factual, and timely communication. For so many years, when we were facing issues like misinformation, the tendency was to sort of sit back on occasion and be able to try to let those narratives fade into the background. What we're finding now is those narratives are really not fading into the background, and being more clear with your communication and messaging needs to be done. Also leveraging community leaders and collaborating with local community leaders to really enforce that positive messaging and the credibility of your projects is necessary. In a lot of the communities we work in, the constituents and the members of the public and the stakeholders we're working with, they have an inherent trust in the politicians that represent their community specifically. A lot of the times we find it to be very beneficial if we're working with those community leaders first very, very early on in a project so that they can help guide us into how we should shape our messaging, or if what we are trying to essentially sell as planners is reflective of what the community is looking for. So I also wanted to chat about some engagement techniques that can be used to build relationships that can improve project viability. The first one here is to trust the experts. So often what we've seen on projects is that there's been a lot of planners who've taken the engagement lead on the planning side specifically. That's how I started my career myself as well. This works on many projects, but there are a lot of projects where tensions are heightened to a point where you might need engagement-specific practitioners to be able to actually manage the concerns that are coming up. Another side of that is internal capacity building. Actually training your team to develop those skills that are required for effective engagement is something we're not seeing enough of at the moment. There's been so many situations where we've seen planning teams be caught off guard by public concerns or stakeholder concerns, and the reality is that we can be mitigating those so much sooner. Resource allocation is another key part of that as well. There is not very often adequate funding support for the engagement space on projects. And now that we are finding that the engagement side of it, the relationship building side of it, is becoming more and more relevant to projects, we do believe that more dedicated funding for those processes are really needed. The benefit here is that by investing in using specialists or building internal capacity, you can really help your organization create more sustainable relationships with communities and the stakeholders and public as well. Another item here is co-creation. This is a technique we're using more and more frequently. When we're thinking of co-creation, the way I like to think about it for the most part is giving up a seat at the decision-making table. So often when we are working on a project, the approvals are coming at a very, very high level on those projects. And more often than not, especially on controversial projects or more contentious projects, we are finding that there is pushback to that decision-making process as a whole. We are finding now that by giving up a seat at the table to some members of the public, to stakeholders, to a member of the community maybe who represents a larger portion of the community, giving up a seat at that decision-making table can make those projects, again, feel much more representative of the communities you're working in. It fosters a sense of shared ownership and accountability on those projects, and again, it leads to a stronger project supports more innovative solutions and more resilient project outcomes, because the people who are affected by the project get to be part of the actual decision itself, rather than just feeding information into it and hoping that it makes it through the end. Media monitoring is something we're doing more consistently now as well. Again, I know some of you have maybe been doing this for a number of years, but across the planning impact assessment space, it's really not something that's been done en masse, but really using tracking tools to analyze media coverage and social media coverage as well to understand public sentiment is something that we're seeing more and more on projects. We're using real-time tracking, we're using trend analysis to basically understand exactly what those key concerns are as they're coming up. And then we are also moving towards a position of rapid response as well, where if we are seeing things out there like misinformation, like narratives that are not that don't accurately reflect the project, we are able to use this media monitoring very, very early on to actually be able to change our communications plans, our key messages, our FAQs, to be able to adapt our projects as quickly as possible. The benefit of this is that by focusing on media monitoring specifically, you can proactively manage your reputation, and you can also allow proponents and projects team to remain a trusted resource. That's really, really key, because throughout the project lifecycle, whether your project is going 2 years or it's going 20 years, the project team, the planners working on the project, the proponent, everyone in that situation needs to be in a position where the public and stakeholders do trust them to deliver accurate information. And we're finding that being able to be a source for that accurate information very, very early on in a project does put you in a position where later on in projects, those same stakeholders, members of the public, are able to continue to trust you. And by addressing those concerns quickly and transparently, again, you can demonstrate commitment to open communication and show that you, again, are responsive to their needs, that you are listening to them, that you do hear the concerns, but that you have, that you are sharing something that is factual, that is more consistent with the actual outcomes of the project. Storytelling is another beneficial tool we tend to use on a lot of projects. By storytelling, I mean on a lot of projects, we craft compelling narratives that resonate emotionally with stakeholders and focus on shared values and human-centered stories. A lot of the times we're talking about infrastructure development, and all infrastructure development has an impact on people. Whether, if we're talking about linear infrastructure, for example, everything that's done from a linear perspective, so water, transmission, transit, anything like that, is often done to build communities and to build density. There are benefits that communities are going to have from these projects as well, including economic development. By understanding what the actual outcomes of projects are, and by focusing on that storytelling element, we are finding that we are getting that benefit really early on projects of getting those relationships formed, mainly just by answering the question of why these projects are taking place in the first place. The benefit is that storytelling can transform those controversial issues that we've talked so much about into really relatable causes. And those can help to align projects' goals with community values and also help to reduce that politicization as well. And then by connecting with stakeholders and the public on an emotional level through those stories, you are building a deeper level of trust and empathy with them, and that helps to foster a genuine relationship and a shared sense of purpose on that project. I'm sure a lot of us are proud of the projects that we work on, and it's a bit of a shame sometimes when people don't see the value that we think that we are bringing on those projects. But again, being able to be very real on those projects and showing the impact and benefit of them can be something that can pay a lot of dividends in the long run. Feedback loops are one that I know a lot of people in this room have definitely done before. But by that I mean essentially establishing continuous feedback mechanisms that allow stakeholders to voice their opinions and to see how their input influences decisions. We go by that in a number of different ways. In terms of approaches, we use a lot of online platforms for that now, especially post-COVID, and we also clearly communicate back to the public and back to stakeholders how their feedback has been incorporated into public decisions. What we're finding so much of the time is that there's a frustration sometimes with the public and stakeholders when they don't see their input reflected on projects. The reality of it is that we can't have every single view incorporated into the end of a project, but if we can show people and provide direct answers into how feedback was incorporated, we're going to get much less of that pushback that we've been now seeing for a number of years. Grassroots engagement is another element there as well. By building support from the ground up and engaging local community groups, you'll be able to communicate with community members, stakeholders, and the public in a way that essentially feels familiar to them as well. Sometimes, as consultants especially, a lot of us might come off a little bit stuffy, especially when working in smaller communities. Sometimes by working on the grassroots side first and building support on that side and building those relationships, you're going to have a stronger, trusting relationship later on in projects as well. And like I said, taking that relationship first approach is something that we really do try to emphasize, that active listening, that continuous engagement, and that personal touch. Essentially, all of that is just showing an effort in the project, showing that you are someone that is not just another face on it. You are not just another consultant or another bureaucrat that's in the room to sell a project. You are someone there who genuinely cares about the work that's being done. And by showing that, you really do, you do see a lot more buy-in on these projects that essentially create that foundation of trust, help you to navigate those challenges better, reduces those conflicts, and fosters that longer-term project support. And again, just some of the key takeaways here. Right now, we are seeing a lot of projects that are politicized, they're more scrutinized, they're more contentious than ever before. And it's the strength of the relationships that we're building and how effectively we build those relationships that determines essentially the viability of those projects. If you're focused on building trust through those relationships, you're going to find that the project outcomes and your project benefits are going to be a lot stronger. Through techniques like co-creation, grassroots engagement, and feedback loops, and the other ones we talked about today, you're going to find as well that stakeholders and the public have much more buy-in for your project and view your projects in a much more positive light. And again, as the landscape of engagement evolves, it's always important to remember that as planners working in this space, it's important to stay agile and responsive to stakeholder needs, political shifts, and changing public sentiments.
Oh boy. Okay. To this. And which one is yours? This one here. I think we got her. Let me just find out. Ho ho ho. Just when I thought it was all going to work out. Nothing.
This is it?
That's it. There we go. You should just stay here, okay? So we'll get you a chair. Join us at the front. I'm pleased to welcome Michael Fox from ICE. And Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you. And we're good to go. Michael, you good to go? Yep. There we go.
Miigwech, wache, maigi shake up wait them Natish Cash. I'm from Winness First Nations, which is on the Hudson Bay coastline, middle of a large provincial park called the Polar Bear Provincial Park. So good to be here. I wanted to say thank you for the organizers and for selecting us as one of the presenters here on the panel and with the rest of us up here. I enjoyed your presentation. It was pretty good. It was triggering a bunch of thoughts. I only know I got 20 minutes. So it's very interesting, these Indigenous-led projects, particularly the Webequie First Nations, because you're right in the nexus, right, of resource developers, resource regulators, and resource users. And as an Indigenous rights-bearing community, exercising their rights individually, and it's a bundle of interests at the end of the day that you're trying to manage. And part of that is managing, in the middle of that is government relations, investment relations or investors relations, media relations, and community relations. And that's another set of dynamic or ecosystem as they engage in a controversial project such as these roads into the Ring of Fire. So I'm old enough to know, I guess, or been part enough to know that there's always this pattern when it comes to Indigenous major undertakings, right? You sort of got to get through the political first, right? It gets messy, everybody postures, and until there's some kind of alignment, with these things, so it's like political management at first, then out of that political management alignment becomes a process that everybody agrees to, a set of principles that they're going to work together. So it becomes process management before you actually get to the project, right? Then you can actually do project management kind of thing. So that's kind of the general pattern in this. So I want to talk about today a couple of things that Webequie has learned. And it's always a set of emerging, progressive set of agenda items as they move one step at a time, 10 steps and 20 steps later. You may be thinking about co-planning. Then it gets into a sort of evolution around co-management and maybe co or shared decision making. It's not this static thing when it comes to Indigenous communities, because they're asserting things that's been cut off from them, for decades, kind of thing. So, so Marian was supposed to be here with me. She has a newborn, and so it was the little one's bringing germs home every day from daycare, so I think the parents are getting sick, so I just wanted to make a mention for her. I'm going to go through quite quickly what is the Webequie Supply Road, what we've done in that space around engagement and consultation. That's a little bit of us. Project overview. Yeah, I better follow this, otherwise I'm just going to meander on here. That's what I do sometimes. Okay, so I think does anybody know where Webequie is? Everybody in the far north of Ontario can just put up your hands. Everybody in the remotes. Okay, so some of you guys, half of you guys know where Webequie First Nation is, and so as a remote community, it's, there's no market there. You're not going to set up a commercial strip mall there when there's no people to buy stuff. You got to work with what you have, type of thing. And in a lot of cases in Canada, it's resource development, right? It's forestry, oil and gas, mining, whatever that's there. So in the far north, there's mining. On the left side of Webequie was the De Beers Victor project. right? Their diamond mine that they had that they closed down. And so Webequie looks at that and said, what was the lessons learned around that? You know, like it was 12 years that they opened up, mined that one pipe, the kimberlite pipe. And then they look to the west side, Musselwhite mine, another remote mine. And I think it's in its 26 years of operations. With 4 signatory communities in the impact benefits agreements, as well as 2 associate signatories of the tribal councils. And what's the best practice there? So on the east side, they're looking at Attawabscat and the challenges that they had. And on the west side, they're looking at what are these guys been operating forever, right? For 26 years. So Webequie stands in the middle, thinks, okay, what's the best we can take on both sides that we've learned on these ends, including road access in the Musselwhite, right, kind of thing. So I think so they're not alone when it comes to the remote challenges of being diesel dependent, or the high cost of living, the goods and services, the struggles around finding teachers that want to work there, or finding nurses that want to work at getting medical care for the students. They want what you guys want. Right? They want good health care for the elders, they want good schools for their kids, and they want jobs for their members. It's nothing magic about this. Like, part of my job a lot of times is just demystifying things. And I'm from the remote communities, just up in the thing. So I understand the journey and the challenges around that. So the Webequie Supply Road really it has a very distinct purpose. They didn't want to see where Attawabscat, where it was a winter road to the mine site. So they wanted their own access road to any proposed mine in the future, so they can actually drive there and go home after the shift. Because some of the social impacts was that the partners that lived in Attawabscat didn't like the fact that their partners were gone for 2 weeks now. And actually a lot of them quit because of that. So there's going to be, so Webequie Supply Road really is an economic development road for them, to move in supplies, to move the service and their people to go back and forth for any future development that's in the Ring of Fire. So that's that. So you spend time in Webequie. It's been 17 years since the discovery, and I was there from the beginning. I don't know where you guys were 17 years ago, but I didn't have any gray hair. But it really, seriously, and the kids that we did school stuff with around like Mining Matters and all the programs that are out there, they're all adults now. Like the kids, they're all small little kids. I remember I got twin boys, or men now, but I had twins, and I was mentioning that to the kids. And there was a set of twins in the classroom, and they're men now, looking for work. Kind of thing. So with Webequie, they have a philosophy, and when you listen to the elders, they call it the 3-tier philosophy, and in that, and there's I can't do justice around that. There is a cosmology that it's built into how they view the world, largely spiritually and relationally, and you can only tease out a set of principles out of that. Kind of thing. So with Webequie, the elders came and they put forth a set of principles for this project. One of them was a mutual recognition of nation to nation. When engaging with those communities around them, knowing that there's going to be a set of communities. The other one was a mutual recognition of essential knowledge, like the people, like of their ancestors. They understand that exists. They understand the traditional knowledges and practices of their fellow community members around. The mutual recognition of clan, families, and relationships. So we had one Webequie member whose brother was on council in the neighboring community of Casablanca. We had people related to Nabinimig, Ibamatu, Attawabscat. There's just these connections around between communities. The mutual recognition of sustainable livelihood, right? And then the mutual recognition of traditional protocols, because they do have them. So when they started on this learning curve about what is an environmental assessment, what's an impact assessment, the way they viewed it, and Gordon Bubas would explain it way better than I can, they looked at it as tools. Like, okay, you know, because they view themselves as self-determined. It goes, let's use the tools of the Environmental Impact Assessment Act. Let's use the tools, the environmental assessment impact in Ontario, and then let's plan this thing out. So once they were on that, they say, okay, let's build our own criteria, right? Let's build our own criteria on that. So some of those criteria was on the list of communities that should be on their list. So Webequie came up with their own list of communities based on their own criteria, not provincial criteria, not the federal criteria, their own criteria. And so part of that criteria was, you know, geographically closer to the project area, known traditional land use of the potentially of affected lands in the past or currently, downstream effects of the riverways, as well as the closer clan family connections, and then those involved in all-season road planning in the past, because we did a tremendous amount of engagement with 3 other First Nations around planning roads. There was 9 options. We had a 500-page report, so we got to know those communities and their aspirations as part of that engagement kind of thing. So they had their own criteria. So focusing more on Webequie itself, what time is it here? 10, okay. So engagement became kind of one of those learning things, you know, so we submitted, what, 2018 or 19, and then COVID hit, right? So typical, you know, we have, you know, big firms involved. They have, you know, what they do as well as the competitors. They just, okay, let's follow the guidelines and the code of practice and slap it in here, and then let's get going, get some approvals. Well, Webequie, you know, has its own internal challenges around language, around land use, about seasonality of things, about participation, you know, commercial participation as well. Some agreements they wanted in place, you know, for helicopters, for all kinds of stuff, right? They wanted to make sure that was in place so that they can fully benefit. Tens of millions of dollars is spent up there. Anybody's done remote work, environmental impact work, it's tens of millions of dollars for a major undertaking up there. Largely helicopters. A lot of helicopter costs going up there. And then trying to plan that out, trying to budget that out, not knowing what the regulators are going to say. Oh, we want 4 years of data. Well, we budgeted for 2. All right? Well, we want 4 seasons. Well, what's the point of winter for water samples when it's frozen? Like, this can we cut it down to 3, kind of thing. Like, that's the reality of managing these big budgets. You know, as much as we would try to take our cues around that. So we typically did things as that's up there. when COVID hit, and then we had to kind of shift like everybody else, and so, you know, tools were put in place by the provincial government for these communities. They were offered Starlinks for the communities, and that helped enable us to do some virtual stuff. So either chief and council, their staff or their advisors or lawyers for meetings, community information session through laptops. So we basically set up, you know, we hired someone in, you know, I think it was Fort Albany. They set up the OWL and the PowerPoint, and we did the PowerPoint presentation virtually. And we had the questions, you know, everybody was all separated 6 feet apart, and the elders came up. It was funny because, you know, they didn't have to come up, we had a mic, but they would walk up to the computer. Are you there? Can you see me? Like, I have a question. Like, it was kind of cute. But virtually, we had to adapt like everybody else that they were doing. And we also know that they were actually talking to the tribal councils, attending the, you know, Chiefs Assembly meetings, all online. Like their appointments, they were doing things, and they had the ability to engage online, so we adapted to them as well. The other thing too was we got into the local radio shows. There's Wawate Radio. So in Sioux Lookout, it's probably Ojibwe and Oji Cree broadcasting, and then in Timmins, you can actually broadcast in Cree. So we started using that and buying 1 hour of time, and started broadcasting our project through that, and then having translators talking about the project, all the different dimensions, all the value components. And then the website and social media. So the main takeaway on the social media and website, we were trying to drive traffic to the website. Why? Because we had video tutorials and all that kind of stuff on there. But there was a correlation. So when we started just talking to social media posts and stuff, and these are micro-targeting. So like say you got Facebook and you're, I don't know, Sudbury. In the back end of Facebook, you can do micro-targeting. So you just do a drop pin. There's a map in the back of the Facebook. You pay for this thing. And you go in the back and you drop a pin, and then your circumference around, is it 20 kilometers, 50 kilometers, and you pay for whatever ads you want to do. So the people in that area, say Sudbury, all of a sudden they see ads about WSR. That's how it works. So you see the news feed come up. It's the ads that come up on WSR. So we did that with, we did drop pins for all the remote First Nations, knowing that they use Facebook. And that's how we did micro-targeting around the awareness campaign. Once we did that, there was an increase in traffic. But the other thing was that it kind of flatlined. We had to integrate community stories into the project information. Project information is boring. It really is. You get some attention and then you lose them. But as soon as you integrate the community stories, the community narratives into the project narrative, it bumped up. Like it literally bumped up. So there was way more attention around social media, and all the analytics on our social media as well as the Facebook just went right up. And we demonstrated that to the regulators as part of our record of consultation, to show them like there was a lot of intake. In fact, for those that do website stuff, you can actually show where they went, right? Which page, which video they watched, which fact sheet they read, right? Which value study plans that they reviewed. So, website. So on our website, we did video translations, video tutorials. So we did. Okay. So. In that video tutorials, and then we translated them into Cree and Ojibwe, which was fun. And then we started doing, do I have a, oh yeah, so I won't play this. This is a clip, because I don't have time. But we sent our videographer out to the drop downs, the helicopter and the drop down sites. So they had to look at where they potentially can drill the geotechnical to see if where the bridge structures can go. He went out. I won't play because I don't have time. Sorry, guys. But then he did the virtual reality. So he put the camera down, did 360s after he's dropped down, and it was an actual sacred site of the community. And then processed that, and then on the VR goggles. You can actually, we showed that at the open house, the Webequie. They actually they were at the site with the VR goggles. They could actually look around, look at literally it was 360 as if you were there. So it's one of the innovations we adopted for that. So the plan is actually to hit all the sites for them, just for their own IK, right? So there's a virtual reality reference point for them around some of these sites. So they don't have to be geo-referenced, I guess. Sorry, is this working? We also did live streaming and radio shows. So it's the live streaming. We did simultaneous translations. So we had Cree, and we figured it out through this guy I have. Tony, he's a polymath when it comes to tech, IT stuff. He's figured out how the translator can be in Timmins, which she is. It's Angela. I don't know if you know Angela. So she's sitting in her living room translating what we're doing in Thunder Bay live. So when you get online, you can pick which language you want to hear the presentation on, and it's simultaneous translation going on. Pretty cool. 3D video, I think this is what what I'm talking about. So that's one of the sites that he was showing. He dropped down with the helicopter, and then he was just demonstrating the effect. Virtual. Oh, can I show this? All right. So same guy. I asked him. I said, can you create something like a computer animation? Because you had this other guy who was just getting the computer animations. Can you, will this play? How do you, how's that done? Anyways, they,
It's right here.
oh, I hadn't pressed that.
Yeah. Which it should have played by now.
Maybe it's not.
That's strange.
Yeah, so what he did was he created a simulation of a lakeside and one of the proposed engineering bridge on the water crossing.
It's not playing.
It's not working? That's too bad. Okay, because that's probably the coolest thing here. And you can actually control the dude. That guy in the middle there, it's a kind of a, looks like a thing. You can control him, go on the bridge, on the water, on the side, and that's too bad because I asked him to do a little clip. So I just asked, give me a beta version. We'll build in the terrain, the actual terrain that's up there, but just give me a beta version of this thing so that you know, kids and the elders can actually see how the bridge is going to look like under, over, around. You can actually put the type of fish you want in the water and stuff like that. It's really neat. So that's another visual representation, you know, of the things we're trying to do, because visual aid is the big thing. I'm probably one of the few nerds out there that likes reading and, you know, technical stuff, academic stuff, but that's not everybody's like that, right? You got to give them some intuitive sense of what we're trying to say around the value components, kind of thing. So we did a road model version. I'll be done. Okay. So because it's peatlands, we got this sort of geotech engineering concept that we're proposing as the road. So it's not like your typical road, right? Because of the groundwater, it moves. It's imperceptible. You can't really see it moving, but it's moving. So this idea of a floating road, that's basically what we're saying, is what we're presenting, what we're designing. And so that otherwise, if you did the typical road, it'd be a dike in the peatlands, and no one wants that. And so this floating road, this is just a model that we put out there, you know, kind of show and tell, kind of touch and feel. This is what it looks like. Got any questions around it? So we want to make a larger version of this, sort of different phases in the construction over time. So this was the first cut around that. I think this is the last slide. So what's kind of interesting is getting the Indigenous participation. So this is Wolverine, what do they call those again? Field poles or pole runs or run poles. These things are hard to find. Like you can barely see them. But the Wolverines, the community made those poles, the Indigenous pole runs. Not only that, but they went on and hunted and trapped the bait. You need bait for these, right? So you put the bait on top so it goes up, so you can take a picture of the belly and get a piece of the fur for analysis, whatever. You know. Anyways, that's just an example of Indigenous participation in the field work that we're doing. That's all I got. Anyways, thank you very much, and I got to catch a plane. I got to go to Thunder Bay, so I might have to skedaddle here. So.
Do you just want to come up and we'll avoid the embarrassment of me? Yeah. I think we go to. Oh, hey, it worked. Okay.
Oh, you got it.
I know. Who knew it could work, but it did.
Over time.
I was laughing when you were describing the elders and the computer screens, because the university did some work up in the Chilcotin region, and during COVID, and we couldn't believe how absolutely seamless and perfect every elders engagement with the kind of remote system worked. And then we found out after the fact that next to each one there was sitting a grandson or a granddaughter. And I thought, that's perfect, because I mean, who do you call if you have an IT problem? It's a 10-year-old to come and fix whatever's not working on your satellite system. Is that good? So I'm going to introduce Caroline and Alana. They're going to tell you all about themselves and their project. And they have a very different interface, so prepare to be dazzled. Is that right?
I'll just use it on.
Okay.
Okay, so you want me to just put that down? So. Okay, Wache. Hi, everybody. So this is our presentation on a project that we've been working on together, innovative approaches to building impact assessment capacity. Also, it's more of an Indigenous perspective than a technical perspective. So we're just sort of going to go on about the way that we're empowering communities for development. Just before we begin, I wanted to thank the Elder and Gary Pritchard for coming and bringing the medicines and your teachings. I really appreciate that. And it puts us moving forward in a good way. And thank you to OAIA for organizing this and having us here today. So again, Miigwech. My name is Alana Graham. I'm the Impact Assessment Coordinator from Mississauga Council Lands and Resources in Timmins. I'm from Moose Cree First Nation, and I am really excited to talk about this project that we've been working on.
Hi everybody, nice to be back at OAIA. It's been a couple of years. I'm Carolyn Coburn, Managing Director of O'Donaterra. I've been in and around consultation and impact assessment processes for about going on 30 years now. So I'm very honored to be working with Alana and Mississauga Council and the communities in this project. When I'm not doing Indigenous-led impact assessment, I can be found on one of the waterways near my home in North Bay. So today we're going to, Alana's going to give a bit of context for the communities that are within the James Bay lowlands, and we're going to speak a little bit about the challenges and strategies of building impact assessment capacity within the Mississauga communities.
So community context. When we use I think the word context, we could think values, belief systems, community systems. We don't have to necessarily use context, but just to think about it in that way. Mississauga Council represents the interests of the Cree communities in the James Bay lowlands. The Lands and Resources Department is focused on environment and capacity building amidst a development future. Lots of proposals coming to the coast. Really participating in culturally safe approaches, and they're essential for empowering remote communities like mine to navigate through these challenges effectively. Before we change it, I'm just going to talk about this picture because it's going to come up again, the idea of art as translation. So this John Rubin is from my community as well, and this picture is really universal. If you've ever been to a remote community up north, how we travel, how we visit, how we transport the river systems, the watersheds. It's really important to sort of keep that in your mind's eye as being, I guess, coastal people and river people. This is a really universal sort of picture, and it automatically evokes, if you're from the coast or from one of the river systems, this is like very springtime hunt, fall hunt, visiting family, traveling, camping. We live on the water. So Mississauga Council is a tribal council representing 7 First Nations in the Winnipeg lowlands: Attawapiskat First Nation, Chapleau Cree First Nation, Fort Albany First Nation, Sheshwan Cree First Nation, Missinaba Cree First Nation, Moose Cree First Nation, Taquatagamo Nation. We're also supporting impact assessment capacity building for the member communities at the request of the communities. Winnipeg, or as we know at James Bay, the word Winnipeg means big muddy water, or big body of muddy water. So if you have heard that word before, Lake Winnipeg, that's what it means. It's home to our Cree communities. You can't see where I'm pointing, but you can see along the coast where there's the big Akimiski Island. Adawapskat lies there, and our communities sort of go, each of these big river systems going south has a community almost right at the mouth of it. It's really vital to our Indigenous culture and identity, our homelands. It's going to be subject to resource development in the future. They can only hold it off for so long, so preparation is really essential to getting ready for that future. Need for sustainable development that respects traditional land use and shared decision making.
Okay, so we just want to speak a little bit about the challenges of participating in multiple development proposals that are happening concurrently in this region. And I suspect that there's a number of people in this room today that have had experiences with impact assessment in this region. I just wondered if we have a show of hands. Anyone who's worked up in that James Bay lowlands on any of the projects in the last 10 years? Yeah, like maybe 30% of the room. So, so some of this stuff you're going to know, and you probably know it a whole lot better than I. But there's obviously a need to ensure that Indigenous rights are prioritized and respected in those decision-making processes. So just a quick overview of the things that are happening in this region. We have the 3 road assessments that are happening. We just heard from Mike Fox. Mike Fox is already gone. Holy smokes. He's already gone. He was fast. So he spoke about the Webequie Supply Road. There's the Northern Road Link, which I'm not sure this is in the right spot.
It's approximate.
It's approximate. And then there's the Martin Falls Community Access Road that's happening. So those are project-specific impact assessments. Layered on top of that, we have the regional assessment for the Ring of Fire that the Mushkegowuk communities and Matawa communities are co-leading with the federal government and hopefully the provincial government at some point in the future. And then layered on top of that, we have the establishment by the Mushkegowuk communities of the James Bay National Marine Conservation Area, which will work to sort of protect and temper the level and scale of development, or at least work to provide information into project-based assessment in the future. And it's terrestrial equivalent, the Omashkego Conservation Plan, which is also being proposed in that area and will provide a number of different protections to Omashkego homelands. So there's a lot of activity that's happening in this region. All of it is gathering a ton of information. There's a lot of requests for these communities to get involved in these projects. And so that speaks to the importance of culturally safe capacity building in communities using appropriate frameworks, and effective training and knowledge sharing to empower communities in managing development proposals and impact assessment processes, ensuring voices are heard in these processes. We've heard just extensively from Mike about how he has been working with Webequie on these types of processes, so that was really good. So building impact assessment capacity. The Mushkegowuk Council, at the request of the communities, applied for and received the Indigenous Capacity Support Program funding from Indigenous Services Canada for a 5-year period.
I just want to say a few things about the 5-year period that we're laying out. So at the request of the communities to prepare them for these processes, we entered into this agreement over a 5-year period where the first year and a half will be spent building a training for impact assessment that is completely based on community participatory action research, where we engaged the communities. We built a steering committee with community members who are actually here with us today. We brought some delegates from our communities who will be sitting on our committee when we start to build the training in December. With the long-term goal of training running the training and then developing the training further, and also at the end of 5 years, the communities will take it over and run it themselves. And then with the support of Mushkegowuk Council, there can be further capacity building and further training to ensure that workshops around funding, proposals, grants, all that knowledge sharing, they can fund their own positions for capacity for impact and environmental assessments in their own communities. So when the proposals and the projects do show up, the development shows up, they're ready, and this is all based on what they've been asking us for.
So my company was asked by Mushkegowuk Council to co-develop a work plan to be able to roll out this project or this initiative over the next 5 years. So to do that, we worked with Mushkegowuk staff, but also we engaged a number of key community knowledge holders and external advisors. And we came up with quite a big work plan. It was probably the most challenging thing I've ever done in my career. But the key principles of it is that the work that comes forward is co-delivered by the communities, that the communities choose when and what they need within their own context, and that the information and tools that are created through this program are accessible in community where members are living and gathering, so not creating new things that community members have to go to, but going to them in the events that they're already at. For example, if a community is evacuated into Timmins, we would deliver this material in Timmins if it's been requested. That the work and all of the materials are culturally grounded, and we heard time and again the importance of language. There's concepts to the communities that cannot be expressed in any other way but through their own language and through art, which we'll get into. And of course, we don't want to recreate the wheel. We know there's a lot of impact assessment resources out there, so it's taking what's already out there and then changing it and making sure that it is accessible and created in a way that works for each one of the communities. So the key elements of the work plan are creating this steering committee that's comprised of an expert, sort of an outside external impact assessment, lots of impact assessment practitioners, and also community advisory groups, so sort of marrying them together. And as part of that training, we brought some of the folks from the communities that are going to be on the Community Advisory Committee, and we're so happy that you were able to be here. A shout out to my colleague Fiona for dealing with all of the logistics around travel, but I'm wondering if I would like to invite you guys just to quickly stand up, state your name and the community that you're from. Murray, do you want to start? Welcome. Thanks, guys. These guys have a lot of knowledge, and I'm so looking forward to working with you and learning more about the communities and how we can work together. The last three elements we're going to get into in a little bit more detail. So there's going to be an impact assessment toolkit and certification program. We're going to hopefully use art to be able to share and impart processes related to impact assessment, and all of that's going to get put on a website in the interim in a GeoHub repository when it's ready.
The first thing that is again, I will mention again, is our steering committee, our partners and our advisory groups. Building on existing resources, or resources and knowledge that exist in our communities already. So that's engagement, focus groups, interviews, anything that's written, anything that they are willing to share with us, definitely will be put into this toolkit and this certification program. We'll be delivering the training. We've already decided on the hybrid model where, because we are uncertain of the ability of people to make it to an in-person, being remote, we would gather them all together virtually and then for the second half, we would travel to the communities individually to meet them where they're at. Because we may have one from one community and 5 from another, so it's easier to just go with the hybrid model. And then certification and recognition after completing the training, and again, supporting further training for them to fund their own positions in the future and continue on with this training.
Want me to just put it up?
Yeah. So this is a long one. This is like the sort of a big part of how this is all coming about. I'll just get into sort of the history a little bit. So artists as stewards of culture and lands, thousands of years of consideration of Indigenous history and oral history, pictograph history, and the way that we use art to communicate, the way that we have always used art to songs and stories and, paintings and items that are utilitarian but also functional. We use art to communicate, and we use art to translate. So just imagining artists as stewards of culture and lands and the way that they translate concepts at a community level is really, really important to this project. Because we're breaking down language barriers, we're breaking down capacity barriers. We're taking that technical language and translating it into something that can be understood by all levels of the community, not just people on Chief and Council or people who work for the community, but everybody can understand the common language. This all came about by my coworker having a conversation with our director about the concept of artists as messengers. They're messengers. They communicate ideas that are very hard to put in words. Oshikesawik Nanapek is our Omishkego artist collective created by my coworker, Galen Belanger. It roughly translates to those who create on the coast or those who create along the waters of the coast. Oshikesawik means those who create, and Nanapek is the coast. So since we all live on river systems that connect to the coast, sort of again, going with the language, it's a very expressive language. It's not a literal language. We don't have specific words for specific ideas, and often that comes out as a phrase. Future collaboration to create and implement activities in the work plan, but also just integrating that piece, the art. So we're pushing those, back against those barriers and including allowing the entire community to be included, not just people who understand the technical language. So my coworker Galen, with Oshikesawik Nanapek and the University of Ottawa, is examining best practices for Indigenous arts and environmental governance, collaboration and co-creation with a focus on impact assessment. So I have some notes that he wanted me to read. I'm just break it down a little bit. We want to highlight the potential for artist collaboration by showcasing one of our recent initiatives, the collective, where again, we have all these artists who are translating these messages for us. Community engagement has been central in the direction and design, using many of the focus groups and gatherings to understand how art and environmental collaboration can occur. We've had artist gatherings, we've been to the coastal communities, we've held workshops, we've worked really hard at engaging and not just talking at, and really like getting perspectives, focus groups, sharing circles, like really just every word is engagement, every word is data. It's meaningful, and it really brings the project to life. Yeah, so we're just going to go to the website.
We hope.
We hope. There we go. So, and when we say art, we don't just mean painting art. We mean songs, stories, snowshoes. Like those are the regalia. Building that's art. Beading, that's art. It's all a way of translating ideas.
I like the spaceship guy. I don't understand it, but
You know, music, like Kevin Schofield, he's from my First Nation. He's a very talented musician. We have lots of hunters who collect and build their art with the things that they find on the land. And here's a little bit of the pictures of the artists that are participating.
this is a cool website. You can click on everybody and see what their art is and who they are and where they're from.
We have some really young people who are creating hip-hop music about current First Nation issues, and that communicates really well with the youth. So I think that I'm done reading off of this page.
Do you want me to speak to them? Yeah. Okay, so all of that material, as it's being created, and we are just at the beginning stages of it, will be housed on a website and a GeoHub at some point when Mishkegwak has it live. So obviously it would be a central repository for all of these tools and resources. It would be available for community members to access, to get training and to get certification. So we don't know what will be included, but we're going to engage this lovely group of people with some other folks, and we're going to come up with what that toolkit might look like, what would be in it, how will it be delivered within the communities. And also it could include a roster of the folks that have been certified and have taken the training to be able to start creating that knowledge network within the different communities. We have a couple of QR codes here if you're interested. There is sort of a data dump that we've done already, and it's on the Mishkegwak website, so it's just links to different resources and so on. There's also a video series there, the latest of which, and Fiona was very seminal in putting it together on regional assessment. So just, you know, some broad context delivered in plain language in a video way. So I invite you to have a look at that. And with that, thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to more dialogue.
Thanks very much. 3 excellent presentations. Michael's not here. I'm not going to try and answer questions on his behalf. But if you want to come up to the mics and let us know what's on your mind, if you have questions for our panelists, that's great. I'll start the ball rolling since there's no questions yet. First of all, a QR code that you can go to that explains, and I think every Canadian will be interested in this, what a regional assessment actually is. There we go. I'm looking forward to reading that, actually. Transformative nature of technology. I think that's one thing I take away. A little bit of concern, challenges down here, things to worry about from Jeremiah's presentation, or maybe that's what I took away from it. The one side of the coin of, well, I guess the access to far too much information instantaneously. And then on the other side, really understanding how technologies, or the illustrations of how different technologies for communication, for real-time kind of connectivity, can have such a positive effect in the world of engagement, communication, and consultation. And I'd just like to invite each of you two, put you on the spot, to comment a little bit more on that. Yeah, I'm just going to stop there because there's a few other things I could follow up on that, but I'll start down here with Jeremiah. Some thoughts on the transformative nature of technology in the practice of impact assessment.
For sure. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, awesome. Thank you. No, it's been interesting to watch sort of impact assessment evolve from when I started in the consultation space to now. We've really seen, especially since a lot of issues now are getting more politicized, like 15-minute cities, for example, draw a lot more, are a lot more stigmatized now in the past 3 years than they have been in recent years, in the last 10 years maybe. But there was, on 15-minute cities, for example, there was a lot of dialogue online, especially post-COVID, about how those were urban planning solutions specifically meant to control people and keep them held within specific jurisdictions. And obviously, a number of us who've worked on maybe some of those urban planning projects or have worked on the road infrastructure on the EA side associated with some of those projects, we've never thought about it from that lens before prior to it coming up as a conspiracy theory, right? But having to sort of adapt your mentality when working on projects like that is really, really necessary, because what we're seeing is that we never thought about how to mitigate the impact of that type of dialogue, and we were hit with it in one day. So our 15-minute city projects and our road projects and our water, wastewater projects that were all associated with those 15-minute cities immediately overnight became a target. And we had to learn very quickly how to respond to those. And that's one of the core reasons why we started adapting in the way that we have. But this is happening across industries. When we have done some flood mitigation projects, for example, too. We did one in Lincoln a few years ago, and on the Lincoln project in particular, there were accusations from the people who were living along the waterfront that the municipality was intentionally rising sea levels as a way to use expropriation to take those lands. Obviously, that was also not rooted in reality, but that's something that got out of hand very, very quickly. So we've seen these projects on the ground floor get to a level where the techniques we were using previously weren't working. So we have been in a position for years where we've been forced to adapt. Now I think we've caught up, and we're in the position of how we can start getting ahead of it. So now we're looking to do more work on the proactive side and avoiding some of those issues from coming up to begin with. A lot of that comes from putting out project answers, FAQs, project communications, key messages, whatever you want to call them, earlier and earlier on in a project. So, as different as things have gotten, there's a lot of mitigation strategies that we can put into place if everyone on a project team can cohesively understand that those risks are risks.
Great, thanks very much. Turn it over to Alana and Caroline. Some comments on how you found technology transforming practice, communication, engagement.
I think in our situation, since we're sort of in the first phase of development, and really even for the other departments in Lands and Resources, technology has really enabled our First Nations to be participating more. Zooms and virtuals, and the way that we run our social media, like bringing social media online for our projects and our engagement sessions, and really just making sure that our community members and our viewership is always informed of what's happening. So there's no, nobody ever told us about that. Well, even if we can't be there in person in Attawapskat, we can still post something on your bulletin board. We can still invite you. We can still notify you that we are coming to the community to do engagement for 4 days. And in the context of this training, initializing the hybrid, where we enable our community members to come together for the first couple of sessions, really, again, is being more inclusive, making sure that people can do it from home. And if they also really getting a chance to fully immerse yourself in it, which is something that if we didn't have Starlink and we didn't have social media and we didn't have Zoom and we didn't have all those things that have been pushed along in the last couple of years, pushed up really into the forefront, we would be in a real bind because people in our remote communities could not participate fully to the extent that the urban population could, and that was a real concern before. What about us? And it goes both ways for my community, who's got a big membership on reserve, and actually 2 or 3 large hubs off of reserve, urban hubs. They have a membership meeting in Moose Factory, which is on an island, which is a train ride away, or a plane ride. It's not accessible by road except for 8 weeks of the year. We can't be at our membership meetings, so we can't vote. So what about us? What do we do? So they Zoom, and they also have created membership meetings stemming from that, where they actually even Zoom in people who don't live in any of the hubs, who maybe live in another province. So everybody is always included. There's always an option. So I guess that's our response to, the technology.
Yeah, I just want to add, if you want to see a really active Facebook group, go to the Mushkegowuk Lands Resources Facebook group. It's every day, almost more than twice a day kind of thing. There's so much information, and they have programs in Cree, and it's just unbelievable how much communication is happening.
See the political side of it as well.
Yeah, but what that's bringing, What that's bringing up for me is that we're not sort of leaving behind all the traditional ways or the old ways of creating art and using that as a way of communicating concepts. That's still there, but it's married with technology to be able to deliver it in a more inclusive, holistic way. So that's it.
I think, yeah, this is worthy of a session in and of itself.
Maybe we should have Galen come back when he's finished his master's thesis. I think that it would be fascinating. I have to confess, because I'm kind of an old dog in this situation or this space, but he has like the most amazing ideas, and I think him and the Arts Collective, I think they should come back to the conference and present. He has never presented this material himself, so he was kind of nervous about us doing him right there. But
he gave me 2 pages of notes, and I was like,
well, you did,
I will try my best.
Job.
I promise I'll do my best. I'll mention your name, I promise.
Thank you. I'm just going to go over to a colleague in the audience.
Hi, Jeremiah. I loved your presentation. Really nice to see you too. One sentiment that really stuck with me was the misinformation piece. And I think I've struggled on projects with how far do you push challenging back? Because you don't want to get into a back and forth and, you know, any tips on that? Like, I know clear, concise communications and trying to be responsive is great, but at a certain point, when do you stop?
For sure. I think something that planners could do a lot more of is standing on your professional opinion and being very explicit about that. I found that's been a really positive way to be able to say that I know that we might not agree on this issue in particular, but I'm someone who's gone to school for this. I'm someone who is a member of CIP, OPPI, whatever it might be, and I've done X many projects. At some point, if you can, in my experience at least, if you can get them to somewhat at least respect the qualifications that you have, or at least understand that you have a robust amount of education in that space, it can be disarming. It doesn't work all of the time, because on the misinformation side, you can see that sometimes, if you're going to argue sometimes from a perspective that you've had training from certain institutions that might not be aligned with how that might not be positively aligned for those people, it makes it very tough sometimes to be able to have that sell. But a lot of the times, that is my last resort sort of comment, and then sometimes at that point it is better just to say, you know, we're going to agree to disagree, but I want to make sure that we are going to take your feedback. We are going to run this up to our experts. We are going to work with our team to be able to see if there's anything that we could do to address those comments more robustly. I also find that if there are, I'll use the term opposition stakeholders, if sometimes you're working with opposition stakeholders, it doesn't hurt to actually communicate with them more than the people who are already on side for a project. I find that to be really, really helpful, because if you can show that you're genuinely listening to their concerns or you're trying to understand them better, that goes a longer way, whereas the folks who are already on your side for a project or are on board with whatever it is that's happening, they don't need the more regular touch bases. And I think that in engagement, we tend to go the other way sometimes, where we tend to try to pay attention to more of the people who agree with us rather than disagree with us. I'll give one example really quickly. I know that there's some folks here who have worked with at Hardy Stevenson and Associates before, way back when, and they're a sponsor for today as well. One of the first projects I worked on them with was for the previously proposed Kincardine DGR. And on that project, there was a ton of opposition to it. And what we did there was we had a full day meeting with all of the opposition stakeholders, where we were locked in a room with them for about eight or 9 hours. It's a very long time.
And you came out alive?
Yeah, I know, somehow. But during that 8 or 9 hours, again, very long period of time, we got to a level where we knew we were not going to agree on anything, but we had a respect for each other, where to the point we went out, we got a beer after, we were able to communicate with each other, and that helped the rest of the project still move forward fairly well.
So to be clear, this was not a virtual room that you were
No, not a virtual room.
What do the other side of the room?
Thanks. So recently, the Ring of Fire Terms of Reference came out for the regional assessment, and one of the things that struck me was there's a lot of optimism in what that could be. One of the challenges I sort of pulled out of that is just how constraining the Impact Assessment Act is in terms of what gets posted to the registry or what actually ends up in the minister's hand as a final report. thinking about some of the tools and communication techniques that we've seen in this session today, I'm really interested in, especially Alana, but everyone at the table, what your thoughts on what should go in front of the minister as an output of something as important as the regional assessment?
I guess I'll take this one. So I have the privilege of actually sitting on the working group as a representative for Mississauga Council, and I think that, to put it very plainly, what should go in front of the minister is a document that has been refined by the communities, not just the leadership, but by the community members, and that's exactly what's happening now. So we've had the first draft, and we recently met in Thunder Bay to talk about technical language, specific language, inclusivity, timelines, making sure that what is in that document is fully representative of how the communities are feeling right now. So I think that in the end, like IAC has their timelines, but they don't really align with the timelines that are, the realistic timelines, the First Nations timelines. So that's one frustrating point that they've had to really just drop. This is not going to be completely on your timeline. And it really just represents the work that's being done in the communities to get this right. Just to take it back. Okay, this is done, take it back. To the communities, engage on it, bring it back. Even the comments, we had a whole meeting, really a couple of hours just about the public comments. And talking about the language in the public comments, talking about where that's going to lead us, and opening up dialogue from the community delegates about the public comments. And we had a session in the summer about the Indigenous comment section. So really what's going to go in front of the minister is a terms of reference that is drafted and timelined by the First Nations, languaged by the First Nations, and that's what we're going to see. And it's really going to be a bit of a stretch for IAC to accept that, but I think that in the end, that's what's going to happen. That's what you're going to see.
Thank you very much, Lana.
Thank you. My question is for Carolyn and Elena. Very interesting initiatives. I'm curious if you have noticed or observed any difference or similarities in terms of participation from the intergenerational groups to these programs and trainings and engagement, and if yes, how did you adapt to further engage more the group or the generation that was a bit less interested, and also if you have noticed the Indigenous groups have used these kind of innovative approaches to pass on their Indigenous knowledge to the next generation. Thank you.
Do I want to get that?
That's an easy one because we haven't done it yet. Yeah, I guess those are really good considerations when we're creating the tools and resources with the group here and with the other advisors to Mississauga Council. How can we use what it is that we're doing to help pass along knowledge systems, teachings, that kind of thing. But we haven't done any of the training. We haven't even created the toolkit for the training yet. We just have, yeah. So we'll get back to you on that.
I will say, though, that I did some community engagement about the advisory group and about the initiative in general over the summer. And I was in the coastal communities for 3 consecutive weeks. And we're engaging the communities as a whole. And I think, I hope I'm getting your question right. The people who come to the engagement are youth, kids, elders, people my age, people my parents' age. Our real goal is to really engage the community as a whole. And our group is sort of representative of the people who are coming forward and wanting to participate. We have elders, we have my generation. The Artist Collaborative is full of youth, and they're really interested in what's about to happen. So we're going to bring them in. And then again, when you're in the community engagement, the kids are attending your community sessions. They're learning, like they're all learning, and they're all sort of getting prepared for the future as a group. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't see we don't have a specific target, really. Like, I guess for participation in the advisory group, I guess you gotta be 18 plus. But we're seeing youth, we're seeing at the artist event that we had in March, at the community engagement that I did this summer, different festivals, different communities. We're just speaking to everyone and anyone who wants to know what's happening. And not specifically targeting any group, it's just a community as a whole.
That's great. Thank you very much. I think we're ready for our break, and to segue us in.
All right. Thanks to Kevin for moderating and our speakers in session 3. And I want to say, if we can get the presentation back up, we're not going to take a break. We're going to move right into session 4. So thanks again to the speakers, and thank you to Hatch, the sponsor, the Indigenous sponsor for session 3. Oh, okay.
I think I sounded coherent.
And if I can call up for our next session. Sarah McKinnon, environmental planner from WSP, and our speakers for session number 4. And a quick thank you to our bronze sponsors, WCS, Arup, Intrinsic, Parsons, and UBC for the sponsorship. Hey, how are you? Good.
Can I get some water? Can I get some water?
Okay, yeah, good idea.
Yeah, there's snow.
Yes, you vote reversed.
Yeah, we're not taking a break.
Okay, yeah, timing, I know we're a little late. Is that fine for the Q&A, or do you want me to shape the Q&A? Okay, perfect.
I just want to be able to bring my water up with me to the slide, so I'll just stand beside you and then I can swap.
Sure. Yeah. Are you good to just wrangle everybody, or do you want me to stay up here and say we're going to get started?
Either or. To move over. Okay.
Dean tried to call me for it.
Okay. And then moving over to the PowerPoint slide.
Yes.
Just exit out, and then I'm assuming you already loaded up.
You can minimize that, and then
Perfect. And then get into that.
and then down here.
Perfect.
Pick them up from there, and then
Hi, how are you?
current slide.
Hello. Hey, good, thanks. Much better, I think, since we last saw each other. Yeah.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff going around.
Oh, right. And I have 2 little ones.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a daycare bug that comes home, and then there's this small bug that comes home. So it's a combination.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we're nearing the end of the day, so if you want to grab your coffee, refreshments, head back to your seats, and we're going to get started with the last session of the day.
Great, thank you. Great, thanks. Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Sarah McKinnon, and I'm pleased to introduce the speakers of this session, The Crystal Ball. Today, we are joined by John Chadwick and Callum Squires, who will be providing a presentation on the Waasigan Transmission Line Comprehensive EA, and Faiza Waheed, who will be presenting on the human environment of EAs and IAs.
John Chadwick is a Senior Manager of Environmental Services at Hydro One and manages a team responsible for environmental assessments and overseeing the life cycle environmental management of Hydro One's strategic projects across Ontario. John is a professional geoscientist and has more than 23 years of diversified, quality-focused environmental management experience in leadership, project management, technical, field, and training capacities across various sectors. John is Hydro One's representative on the EAPG and has worked extensively over the last several years with the MECP throughout EA Modernization to amend the Class EA for transmission facilities. Callum is a Senior Environmental Assessment Specialist and Project Manager at WSP Canada. Callum leads a broad and multidisciplinary team of experts to prepare federal and provincial environmental impact assessments and permitting applications in Ontario. Callum has over 16 years of experience in the environmental field and brings that experience to provide solutions to his clients and to seek meaningful ways to engage and communicate with Indigenous communities and regulatory agencies. Faiza is the Health Impact Assessment Team Lead and an environmental health scientist at Intrinsic. She specializes in the use of the HIA framework as it applies to major infrastructure and resource development projects, as well as in conducting gender-based analysis plus. Faiza has co-authored guidance documents for Health Canada for federal impact assessment projects and also for the Ontario Ministry of Transportation for assessing health impacts of major new projects. Faiza is a member of the Impact Assessments Agency of Canada's Technical Advisory Committee and the co-chair of the Ontario Public Health Association's Built Environment and Health Working Group. I'll now hand it over to John and Callum for their presentation.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and it's great to be with you all today. I personally just want to say that the presentations have been excellent. I've really enjoyed them. So thank you for that and for everyone's participation. I'm going to start off this presentation with the good news. Last month, this comprehensive environmental assessment was approved. So we had this final EA approved after several years, 5+ years. It's been a long time coming of a lot of dedicated work of a lot of individual people, some even in this room. And two of my staff that were exceptionally dedicated to this, one is at home on maternity leave with twins, and one is in Thunder Bay right now, quickly, urgently working towards all of the pre-construction activities that are taking up her time. So I've come to represent our team in that, and of course with our consultant, Callum and WSP. So just, really we want to share some insights from Waasigan, from the EA perspective, and it's really going to focus on what large field programs in Ontario look like, as well as some insights in building trusted relationships and the ongoing journey that represents for Hydro One with Indigenous communities and Indigenous partners. So this just disclaimer that, of course, while we are in a living and working partnership, both from a development perspective as well as commercial, today's presentation was really angled at the perspective of the EA practitioner and just some of the on-the-ground nuances, challenges, and opportunities of executing a program like this in terms of the field program, and is not meant to in any way speak on behalf of the partners of the program or any individual Indigenous community. So really, this is just an overview of the agenda. Some themes you'll see throughout are kind of themes of really some of the things we've talked about and heard about today already. A lot of good conversation and good comments that I think tie into what we'll speak about here. But, themes of economic opportunities, listening and sharing information, and participation and involvement. So this is we're going to jump into some of the complexities of the field program itself, which Callum will confirm and give us some details on this, but I believe it's the largest field program for transmission project in Northern Ontario ever, involving more than 1,200 field sites. But first, a little bit about what Waasigan is. So it is a transmission line. So we heard about some of the, how busy the nuclear sector is going to be and generation. And at Hydro One, we have the good fortune of transmitting that generated electricity throughout a large portion of the province, the majority of the province. This project in particular is a 360-kilometer line involving a double circuit transmission, 230 kilovolt transmission line from Shania transformer station, Lakehead transformer station in Shania to Atikokan, and then a single circuit 230 kV line from Atikokan to Dryden. I'll pass it over to Callum to give us some details on the field programs.
Thank you, John. Yeah, so here we just outlined the various environmental field programs that we completed as part of the environmental assessment. So we note, 1,200 survey sites. This was a 360-kilometer line with a number of different alternative routes. Many of those sites were actually visited multiple times for, the species-specific survey. So this was a really large undertaking. It was, important to, we heard from the Indigenous communities, the regulators, to have a robust field program, especially compared to some of the previous environmental assessments done, kind of for larger transmission lines in Northern Ontario. So we really kind of pushed the boundaries of, how much field work is needed, and, tried to do it, very early in the process. And here you can see just, a wide range of, different types of field programs. This is also just when we talk about the 1,200 sites, that's just the EA. There's still species at risk permitting that's going on, more surveys there, a huge archaeology program ongoing, as well as cultural heritage. The Waasigan project ticks two major boxes when it comes to complexity when you're working on these big EAs. One, it's long and linear, 360 kilometers of line, and also working in kind of some of the remote areas of Northern Ontario. So these provide a lot of complexities that you need to kind of keep into account. So we'll talk a little bit about just some of the logistical hurdles that we had to go through. So first off, it was in the middle of the pandemic. That made things a bit more complicated. So when it comes to availability of equipment, that actually really impacted us quite a bit, where we had providers who had recently sold off all of their ATVs, or many of them, or their trucks. We had to drive trucks up from Southern Ontario. We drove in some ATV, UTVs from Winnipeg. So having to kind of coordinate that piece. And then just simply the logistics of planning, where are you going exactly for these 1,200 sites? How are you going to access it is, really important. And also making sure that because we are in, a less surveyed area compared to maybe, many locations in Southern Ontario, maximizing, the value in the locations that we pick. We also want to make sure that we're highlighting the support that we received from, a number of different agencies that really helped enable us to complete this kind of a, program. So first, we had field work plans that were reviewed by both M&R, also kind of MECP. M&R also had a very heavy lift. We had a massive aquatics field program. They went through, looking at hundreds of crossings, split into 3 different districts. They really collaborated with us on how can we communicate that information, and they got through it, really quickly, which allowed us to make the most out of the field program. And then lastly, Ministry of Transportation was also really important in terms of, kind of some permits there. Some complexities in terms of how you kind of work through them in these large remote environments. So leveraging tools that you have available. So digital data collection is really helpful. You may not have all the maps for the entire line. You need to be able to pivot, but if you have that in a digital form, that's really helpful. It also allows you, when you're having these really big field programs, you don't want to identify issues at the very end. So it allows you to have kind of QA/QC throughout. And also, we always have to keep health and safety at the forefront. These are, really large programs. For just the aquatics alone, it was about 25 field crews just in 2021. And we always needed to make sure we kept it as a priority. If you're traveling through remote areas, you need to make sure that you're, thinking about those kind of logistics. Keeping in mind that you are, you want to be able to leverage your existing kind of local resources. We relied very heavily on our Thunder Bay resources of, they know about the sustainable forest license holders and how to work with the access roads. They know about, some of the complexities. Like, one kind of unique one that we had to deal with here is we're going out into the bush. And we've got, for aquatics, we've got a lot of equipment, we've got people. So we can't necessarily bring all the water that we need, so we had to look at, options like life straws to be able to kind of support, our teams when they're out there. So there's a lot of things that you need to consider, and you need to consider them early in the process as well, because these are, remote, and you need to make sure that, you're keeping your people safe. And I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks. So just a discussion about, and we've had a lot of this discussion today already, about building trusted and authentic relationships in the context of Indigenous communities and partnership with Indigenous communities. I want to acknowledge the exceptional effort by the communities on this project, a significant amount of work, and their representatives, both from vendors as well as community members and representatives as well, that not only participated and informed, but helped shape the outcome, be it mitigation measures that were summarized and included in the EA, to a number of different aspects of the project. We heard the theme really of not having to have everything be pre-baked. I think a lot of us as planners and scientists want to have it right before we go to an external audience or to anybody that is maybe not kind of in the company or the client that you're working for. And I think that is, there's opportunities missed in doing that. And I think we're hearing that more and more today is that it's okay not to have everything figured out. It's a process, and you're undoubtedly going to learn things in that process and solutions that you may not have otherwise thought about yourself. So proud to announce that this project was really the leading project for Hydro One in our industry-leading 50-50 equity partnership commitment with Indigenous communities. All projects, all transmission line projects in the future that are over $100 million will be 50-50 equity share owned by the nations partnered with where the line traverses in the traditional territories of those lands. It is essentially going to end up with those communities owning transmission line. And in partnership, that there's the commercial aspect of that, which in many cases will provide generational revenue opportunities for those communities. But what we've really worked hard on Waasigan and are trying to apply as a model moving forward is that partnership doesn't need to wait till revenue flows after the asset is in service, but moving that up into the development stage so that we are actually 50-50 partners in how we develop this line together. So that has been an excellent experience, and it is of course not without challenges, and you've got many different voices sometimes in the room, but that's part of the process, and like I said, a lot of good solutions come out of those discussions. These are the partnering nations, and the OAIA Gachagewin Limited Partnership, otherwise known as the GLP, is the nation, the representative of 8 of our First Nation partners, as well as Lac First Nation. So these are some of the ways, I think I jumped over a true working partnership. These are some of the ways that we've really strived to demonstrate how a partnership can function. And there's a number of different aspects to this. Aside from the equity partnership model, it's also making sure early preparations for capacity funding agreements. This project had a partner committee that regularly meets and that has participation and representation that participates with the Hydro One team, both internal meetings as well as at these separate partnership committee meetings. So I want to make this a little bit interactive, a bit planned, but I'm happy to introduce Alison Allison from Encompass Environmental, Fraser, and she is a representative vendor from environmental consultant on behalf of the GLP, and she's going to say a few words about, from the GLP's perspective, about how the GLP set up the structure and the process in working with this, and she's been instrumental in contributing to the EA. So I'm hoping, Allison, the mic works and you can share your perspective with us.
I'm hoping it does too. Okay, great. So thanks to Callum and John for inviting me up sort of I guess a little last minute to talk about this, but still very much appreciated. So I, like John and Callum, can't really speak directly to the experiences of each of the First Nations of GLP, but I was their environmental advisor on the project, so I can speak to what I heard and what I saw throughout the entire EA process. And what I can say is that Hydro One was very committed right from the onset to have a strong working relationship with GLP throughout the entire EA. So that started right at the very beginning with planning the project all the way through to decision making. And John sort of mentioned that there was a project partners committee that was formed, and that enabled a representative from each of the First Nations to quarterly sit down at the same table with Hydro One, talk through issues, talk through a path forward, talk through decision making, and that was very, very valuable. We also had a First Nation project management and implementation team, which was also very valuable. We had a member from each of the First Nations participate in what we called a protection committee, where they could voice their concerns around how the project was going to affect, the natural environment, but also valued components as identified by each of the First Nations. Capacity funding agreements implemented really quickly that provided resources for each of the nations to meaningfully and actively participate in this EA process. And my favorite part of this entire working partnership, I think, was working with Callum on these environmental commitments. I think it's something that we're really proud of. We had hundreds and hundreds, like 800 commitments or something that came out of this environmental assessment, but they went above and beyond what you would normally see. So in a traditional sort of EA, you might see things, commitments that are designed to meet regulatory requirements, but we pushed Hydro One and they were very receptive to it, and we came up with commitments that were very important to each of the First Nations to, again, protect those valued components that they themselves had identified. And another sort of thing that Hydro One did that provided an extra level of sort of reassurance to each of the nations was that there was a commitment right from the beginning to incorporate Indigenous knowledge at any point through the whole project. So it wasn't like you had to come up with Indigenous knowledge, give it to Hydro One at the very beginning, and then that was it. As you collected more Indigenous knowledge, Hydro One was receptive to receiving that and incorporating it into the environmental assessment. And of course, training, employment, and business commitments were also sort of a really great outcome of this working partnership. So there were bumps in the road for sure. Callum and I had lots of weekends and nights trying to work through some of this stuff, but I think what ultimately kept this working partnership so strong was that everybody was committed to seeing the project done, to seeing it done in a good way, and we knew that collaboration was the key to making that happen.
Thanks, Allison. And that resulted in the full-throated support from the Indigenous partners. So it was a joint release of the environmental assessment. And that went a long way to demonstrate the level of engagement and having not just met the Crown feeling comfortable with whether the duty to consult has been met, but that communities are feeling that they are represented in that document. So just and a lot about the training, all of our vendors as well, expectations were set on vendors as well as the contractor of requirements for Indigenous spend, for business procurement, and for training. Lots of training up front in terms of environmental assessment, in terms of reference for communities that had interest in learning more about that, and we've extended that into the archaeology program, where we several months ago now, beginning of the field season, wrapped up a 5-day training course that came with certification, and what we were able to do is match our archaeological vendors to attend that so that their representatives are there on the last day and can immediately position attendees from community with a real job opportunity coming out of that course. So that was something that was very successful and appreciated, and it's working now. So not only is it Indigenous monitoring on behalf of communities, but they're also Indigenous technicians that are working on behalf of the consultants that are working for Hydro One. In terms of access and sharing of information, I think we all know on big projects, especially big linear projects, you know, accessing data and seeing the big roll sheets. Like if we had a big community open house here, we would probably take up more than half of the room in that 360-kilometer line and trying to look at that. So looking at innovative ways of applying technology, applying interactive maps, having real-time access to communities, both for which we're applying for archaeology and the results of the archaeological program, but also during the EA and the field surveys, and when that data came back, and having that updated in a way that can be easily communicated and understood. Because access to and sharing information is not, it needs to be digestible, it needs to be reviewable, and it's really helps build a cornerstone of trust. And listening to nations is critical. We also saw a theme of art in the last presentation. I loved that, and seeing some of the great work. And you know, I'd be remiss without pointing out Storm's amazing artwork that you'll see throughout the rest of this presentation. But certainly that is something that came to us in the project as a comment, and we're most interested in conveying that and giving that opportunity. And it's just everybody we have talked to about this artwork just loves it. So yeah, as I said, we jointly released the EA. There was nearly 800, I think 798 commitments that Alison mentioned, and it was really based on a prioritized mandate of meaningful engagement and collaboration with communities. And it really, at the end of the day, enabled a better product. So I think we're seeing a shift. I think there was a perspective, you know, some time ago where, oh, these processes take time, this is going to slow everything down, and now it's actually the key to speeding things up. When you have we had a vested partnership. We are in a vested business partnership, and that doesn't mean that the important engagement and the important perspectives that the communities and elders are going to share and bring up, and you're going to have challenges, and you're going to be pushed to do things that may be not the way you've normally done your business, but it helps you adapt and encourages you to adapt as a business and come up with things that really work for the future of this project. So yeah, I'll pass it over to Callum to wrap it up.
Yeah, so I know we're pretty much at time, so I'll try and go through the last few slides really quickly here. Yeah, so I think John, you know, Alison really characterized really well of, you know, where we ended up. So I just wanted to talk through really quickly just a few things that we did along the way that I think, you know, really helped to kind of build that trust. So expanding the environmental fieldwork from just a preferred route to all the alternatives. That was a huge decision. There was a lot more fieldwork because of that. Hydro One was open to that, engaging on field plans, providing early review, you know, ahead of kind of the mandated, you know, regulatory review. We had collaborative workshops of like actually wordsmithing language together, right? That would go into the environmental assessment. That was really important. Incorporation of IK as well, and also recognizing because of that, building up that trust. There was agreement to kind of co-develop some things outside of the EA process, such as like traditional land and resource management plan, as well as monitoring plans. So Alison kind of noted how, you know, we did incorporate a lot of mitigation measures, worked very collaboratively, which was really great. So things like expanded buffers for water, wild rice, moose was also really important. And then, as I kind of noted, kind of continuing to engage on that mitigation going forward. For these long linear developments, just some things to make sure that we're always kind of keeping in mind is just the scale of that field work. And, you know, when you're working with the individual communities to understand what, you know, their perspectives are, what are they looking for, you know, in terms of involvement, monitoring. We had communities that were very interested in addition to that, just, you know, environmental capacity building. and kind of what John had alluded to as well and others is one of the key things to help enable participation is trying to get out of that really strict sequential thinking and like presenting, something absolutely perfect. So presenting, number of field crews, overlapping field crews is, really important. So you can help support the communities around, how many people do they need to join you out there? And then just one last thing that we heard, was, barriers to participation. The program of this size really is unique in terms of offering potential here. So we want to be able to maximize it, right? We know EA fieldwork can be challenging, very sporadic, so how you piece that together is really important. We were able to directly hire a number of Indigenous participants and also had a lot of different monitors. And some things that we had heard about just kind of barriers, just trying to listen to the communities was, in postings and just how we're portraying, the participation, like, access to a vehicle and equipment, is really important to kind of highlight that, when they're trying to, get support and get, people interested and excited for the project. So, just really quickly, those are some things that, we tried to implement that ultimately led us, as John noted, being able to jointly release the final EA kind of with Hydro One and their kind of First Nation partners. So there's a lot of little steps along the way. It was a lot of hard work, but we're really happy kind of where we were able to end up. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much to John and Callum. And now we'll hand it off to Faiza.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm the last thing standing between you and sitting in traffic, so here we are. Okay, so the crystal ball, right? Like that's the title of the session, the crystal ball, like, having a device using which we can look into the future, see what's coming, and decide how we need to get there and whatnot. So I was kind of surprised I'm in this session because I wasn't really thinking about having, this superpower ever, being a seer, looking into the future. If I wanted a superpower, it would be something like flying, telekinesis, mind control. These are not the droids you're looking for, right? Like, so those will be my superpowers, not the crystal ball. But again, I've heard the awesome presentations we've had so far today, and I was thinking about my own presentation, and I thought, wow, I'm going to say everything these people have already said, and how am I going to do that in a way that sounds new and different? So maybe what I can do is try and be some sort of crystal ball and sort of tie it all together and bring it together. And I can sort of I may pick out your name, and if I remember something that you said or a question that was asked that sort of, made me think, wow, like that is a really important point and a great point. The way I did health assessments, say in June 2024, is not how I do health assessments in October 2024. It's different. I've learned a lot, right? So how are we going to be evolving and changing over the next few years if even 3 months has taught me so much in the area in which I work? I'm going to talk about the human environment because that's my lane. And not to say that the natural environment isn't equally or more important, but in the work that I do, I find that they are intrinsically intertwined, to use the name of my company, Intrinsic, but they are intrinsically intertwined, and especially for communities, Indigenous communities, whose lives are related very directly to the land and the water. And we've talked a lot about spirituality. We've talked a lot about projects and how they make us feel. We've talked about project managers, and we've talked about what Katrina said. It matters what comes from inside. It's a mind shift. We've talked about a whole lot of questions related to, okay, so you're going to be engaging and you're going to talk to Indigenous communities and you're going to build capacity. What about the capacity for consultants, right? Like when I look at this room, and I'm not preaching here, when I look at this room, what I actually see is a lot of power. Like when we do big projects, when we build infrastructure, when we do resource development, mining, nuclear, You are the folks who are working on the environmental assessments that get these projects through. So you are the folks who have the power within your hand to influence policy change, to take us to where we need to go to be able to do the things that we want to do. Do we want to reconciliate? Do we want reconciliation? Do we want better, meaningful engagement? If yes, then the people in this room have the power to be able to do so. Like, there's no doubt about it. I've worked with some of you over the years, and some of you I'd like to work with over the years. But again, like, these are huge, massive projects. We heard Michael talk about the Webequie Supply Road. I'm working on that project. It's been going on for a few years. Engagement has been challenging. The whole project is extremely challenging. However, the team and the way they're doing the engagement and bringing in technologies that we're looking into the future is what is really going to define the project at the end of the day. The road we are going to take to get there. And that will be the legacy of the project. And Jeremiah brought up some really important considerations and sort of pitfalls and things that have like arisen in the last few years, especially related to social media. And I do believe I should be advancing my slides. There we go. And so, which sort of brings us to, back to the crystal ball. What do we need in the future when we're going to be looking at all of these issues and we're working on these challenging projects in these challenging environments? What do we need EAs and IAs to be? What do we need for them to do for us, for communities? One of the things is flexibility, right? Like that really awesome image that I put an image in each and every one of my slides. So if the words are like a little hard for people to read because it is the end of the day and we've had a lot of information thrown at us today, we can just look at the images. It'll help you. So being flexible is really important. It's important for environmental variability. Changing environments, climate change has had a huge impact. Legislative flexibility, we have different rules when it concerns the federal government, the provincial governments, the municipalities, the regional municipalities, local municipalities, and communities themselves. We're looking at Indigenous knowledge integration, the two-eyed seeing and the approach that we're going to take. How are we going to do that? Someone, I don't know who it was today, all of the names are sort of like meshing together in my head, but we talked about how Indigenous knowledge isn't just something that we integrate. Oh, here's a report that has knowledge from my community. You consultant or proponent take it and go integrate it, and that's it, it's done. But that's not how we actually integrate Indigenous knowledge. We start integrating Indigenous knowledge by first asking communities with whom we're working, what are your values? What should this environmental assessment be built on? If you're going to recognize yourself and your community in this environmental assessment, what are the things we actually should look on? What does health mean to you? Right? Like, to me, this was different. When I was, early in my career and I was talking about health as a state of complete physical, social, mental well-being and not just the absence of disease. No, that is not what health means to us, Faiza. To us, health means minobawadazuan, which means the good life. That is what health is, right? So like that changes your perspective, and that is Indigenous knowledge. And then your entire environmental assessment, or at least the parts that I work on, the human environment parts, are centered and built around these cultures and these values. So some principles of flexible environmental assessments or impact assessments, and I'm sure there's a lot. I just picked a few of these. And this quote from this American politician I thought was very appropriate. He's a Republican, and I decided to ignore that because I really like the quote, which says, "I am a person of fixed and unbending principles, the first of which is to be flexible at all times." Right, which is really important. And we've seen time and time again through all of the examples and the projects that people have presented today, the importance of being flexible during COVID, when engaging with communities, different parts of communities, when you have difficulty with language, how do you use art to do it? So these are really awesome and great lessons. We need to sort of start thinking about community-led engagements. How would the community like to be engaged? Not here, I have survey, you fill survey, I take results, I put it in my report. It does not really mean anything, right? Like, but how would the community like to be engaged? It has to be an iterative and adaptive approach. We need to be culturally sensitive. Again, we are going to look at indicators that are important to communities, and not indicators that a terms of reference tells us we need to look at. The terms of reference, and again, should be developed, I don't know who it was, sorry, I'm pointing at you, but it was a presentation before. The terms of reference should be built in conjunction with communities because they're the ones who are going to define what is acceptable to them, which is what the EA has looked at, which then makes the project acceptable to them. Right? Like really simple things. And I know that we all know this, and I am preaching to the choir in many different ways. And again, like I said, I'm not preaching, but I feel that these are the things that we need to be doing a lot better, and we need to be doing them consistently if we are to avoid the pitfalls of all of the things that Jeremiah talked about. And they're real things. Misinformation in the age of social media, it's not a small thing. When someone's fallen down the rabbit hole, how do you use facts to bring them back up, to be able to talk to them on a factual basis? It's very, very hard. So how do we do this engagement and the building of trust in environmental assessments and impact assessments? So we are trying to avoid as much as possible falling down these rabbit holes. Having trust as a foundation. Trust is a heavy word, right? Like, I mean, in whichever language, in whichever culture you talk about trust, it's a heavy word. Building relationships, it's very difficult, it's very challenging, and it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes a mindset change, right? Like Katrina, I'm gonna keep repeating what you said. It takes a mindset change. You have to think about, well, if I were in this community and this is the project that was coming to me, how would I want to be engaged? What are the questions I should be asking? So as consultants who are working for proponents, some proponents are amazing, as we've heard. Some proponents maybe need to sort of, their hand held to take them there. So how do we be that bridge that allows for the building of trust between communities, between proponents, between governments? How do we be transparent? Like a lot of the times, I'm looking at the time I have about less than 10 minutes. A lot of the times the approach is when we're presenting information and we're talking to communities about these are the impacts of the project, these are the mitigation strategies, it's just less is more, right? We don't want to confuse communities. However, you need to be able to say everything that you are looking at, why you are looking at it, all of the negative impacts, what your mitigation strategies are, and how you plan to address them, along with the monitoring plan and the commitments that you have, so that communities can see the full picture. So that's really important because you don't want people to be surprised by something that you thought wasn't important for them to know. They see it later and they're like, oh, do I trust you? Because you didn't share everything you were supposed to share with me. So this slide talks a little about stakeholder engagement, the types of stakeholder engagement, as well as rights holder engagement. Some of the things that we think about when we're trying to build an engagement strategy or an engagement plan with rights holders and with stakeholders. What is the proponent hoping to achieve? What is the regulator looking for? What is the level of engagement you would like to have with the communities? Are you just going to inform them? Are you going to engage with them? Are you going to collaborate and interact with them? How often are you going to engage? What is the level of concern within communities about the particular project you're talking about? Who are the people you're going to bring on board, and how are you going to engage with them? These are all really important questions, and it is really important to be transparent about them when we're putting together these engagement strategies and engagement plans. So the who is generally when we're talking about who we engage with, we do have set criteria, set groups of people whom we engage with, but even between that, the gender-based analysis plus approach that exists talks about not just, we have communities and we go and engage with communities and we're done. But who are we engaging with within communities? When we're talking to people, are we making sure that we reach out to the people and get their opinions, whether they are men, whether they are women, people who have disabilities, youth, and again, when you're talking about urban areas, lower socioeconomic groups, do they have community representatives whom you can reach out to engage with communities like that, to be able to understand the challenges that they would face? The how, Jeremiah talked about this quite a bit. Katrina talked about this quite a bit together with Jasmine, and a number of other presentations touched on this. So I'm not gonna go into it, especially because I only have 7 minutes left. However, there's a number of ways in which we can engage with communities. There's a number of ways with which we can engage with specific subgroups within communities. We need to be able to identify that the majority of the impacts for projects are not necessarily to the groups with whom we are targeting with our engagement. It may be to the invisible minorities whom we're not considering. Right? So those are the kinds of things that we do want to think about and consider. If we're doing surveys and we're not having a huge amount of uptake with the surveys that we're doing about major projects, again, let's just take the Webequie supply road that I was working on. The chief and council suggested maybe a good idea for you would be for you to take a community representative and see if you can go door to door to engage with people if they're not able to come to the community meetings to talk to you. Right? So like look at the community in which you are in and what are the ways in which we can do it. Michael talked about virtual reality, what was that thing? Virtual reality, the glasses? Again, can't remember what it was. So that, right? And then last year at OAIA, I moderated a presentation that has still stuck with me. It was about the LRT, and the person who presented talked about how they had developed a program that would mimic the noise someone situated next to the LRT would be able to hear as the train went by, right? So this is the noise you would hear, and if we have a noise barrier, this is what you would then hear. Now this is the crystal ball and next level engagement, right? Like being able to show people where they're at, what is going to change within their environment should the project go ahead, should be part of our engagement strategies. It's going to be challenging, and I'm taken back to the first presentation we heard today from Kimberly, who talked about there's a lot of next-gen stuff that is available, that is out there, but we're hesitant to use it. Maybe it's time that we slowly started changing. And the lessons that we all learn are lessons that are shared for all of us so we can learn from each other's, I don't want to use the word mistakes, but the challenges that we faced so that the others learn from them and say, oh, let's avoid that and do this instead. The how of effective communication, there was a lot of talk about language. Which language are we communicating in? What media are we using? What form of art, music are we using? I'm a millennial, so I've talked about avocado on toast. And sort of, this is in context with when you have two different types of knowledge side by side, how do you reconcile them? Do you need to reconcile them? And when I speak of this, I'm talking about two-eyed seeing, where we have both Western science and Indigenous knowledge, and we're trying to integrate them when we're doing EAs. Do we need to force them to sort of conform to each other or have come to the same conclusion? Or can we just look at them side by side, where you have this avocado on toast with an egg and the other one is just plain vegetarian, right? Like, is that possible to do? Because they're both different perspectives and they're both equally important. Indigenous-led environmental assessments, Michael talked a little bit about this. This is the way we are heading. A lot of the federal projects, especially since the Supreme Court of Canada decision came down, are going to be primarily about Indigenous communities and major projects within Indigenous communities on Indigenous land. So Indigenous-led assessments, where we are trying to identify and work towards self-determination and sovereignty of Indigenous communities, using the two-eyed seeing approach, building capacity, and again, this is to Gary's point on the one that he raised, capacity building not just for Indigenous communities who are learning about nuclear and transportation and waste management and et cetera, but also consultants like me who are going to try and learn about Indigenous ways of knowing and being, because when I'm engaging with Indigenous communities, I am meeting them halfway and not expecting them to do all the work. So steps to building trust and buy-in with Indigenous communities. A lot of people talked about this in different ways. They talked about how they applied this in projects. They talked about how this worked for them. Early engagement, meaningful engagement, respect for traditional knowledge, shared decision-making, having Indigenous members sit on advisory groups, decision-making boards, mutual benefits. How does a project benefit communities equally, not just one part of the community or just men or people who are able to take part in employment opportunities, but how does a project, or how will it, or how can it benefit most members of the community? How can women benefit if they don't have access to childcare opportunities that they can then leave their children with and go partake in employment opportunities? Thinking about those types of things, and long-term relationships. Again, like I said, relationships, building relationships, these are really difficult, heavy, meaningful concepts. But to be able to do that, we have to start slow. I think Cole talked about this. You have to jump in at some point or another, and you have to figure it out, and you have to start doing things to be able to get to where you want to go. So strategies for public buy-in, not very different from how you would sort of build trust and get buy-in from Indigenous communities. Clear communication. Remember, we have Google as a resource. So when we say, oh, I'm an expert in my field, and I think that this is what's going to happen, they'll be like, no, I looked it up on Google. This is what it says, right? And then how do you challenge that? So clear communication is really important, because nowadays we live in an era where authority does not really matter, and authority is sometimes the enemy, right? So like, how do we communicate and engage with the public in these times? Jeremiah has given me so many great points to talk about in my own presentation. So I've just identified 2 challenges here for building trust. The first one is a historic one. So there's historical distrust due to past exclusion from decision-making process. This is a legacy of colonialism. This is a legacy of residential schools. This is a legacy of systemic inequities that we are still sort of living in, and that we push communities, and especially Indigenous communities, to live with. How do we overcome challenges like this when we're doing engagement for EAs? These are really, really big things. Maybe what we do is we acknowledge the past injustices. Oh, my timer. And start small. We have commitments that we make. We follow through on them. Conflict of interest between proponents and communities and sort of the value system that is in place. Let's talk about it. How can we put these 2 things side by side, the avocado on toast with the egg and without the egg? Challenges and opportunities as we're working in the human environment. I use this slide whenever I talk about health impact assessment, and it's sort of relevant to pretty much every aspect or valued component within the human environment, because we're trying to find the right balance, and we're trying to engage rights holders and stakeholders in the most meaningful way possible. Often we're trying to do it as early as possible, from the pre-planning stage. I'm a member of the TAC of the IAIA, and I really think that we need a pre-planning stage, because the planning stage of the federal process already has so much packed into it, and there's very little opportunity to have relationships built, because you're now actually producing stuff that becomes part of your impact statement, right? So having that sort of relationship building period that sort of falls into and plays into the planning process is really important. Speak of federal projects here. Collaborating with other teams. So this is really important, because we don't want to have communities tired of being engaged with so many different people. So if we can collaborate with other teams working on different valued components, and we can try and get those questions and those sort of engagement sessions through together, then we are burdening communities less, a lot less. The other thing to remember is all of these valued components that we're talking about and the things that communities are saying are important to them, they're connected. They're very deeply connected. One thing from here, policy reform, right? For future environmental assessments, we need to be able to enhance and change policy. And like I said, the power within this room to be able to do that, because you are the people who do this work. Key takeaways: flexibility in environmental assessments, genuine efforts to build and foster trust and collaboration, more sustainable, inclusive outcomes, and environmental assessments should not just be regulatory exercises, but they should have meaningful community engagement and help us work towards long-term sustainability for communities, as well as allow them to exercise environmental stewardship of their own areas and their land. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Faiza, as well as John and Callum, for your awesome presentations. We'll now open up the floor for a Q&A session, if anyone has any questions. The last Q&A session of the day, so.
Hi, Carolyn Lee from OPG. Question for John and Callum. Are there any insights on what worked well or maybe what didn't work so well for incorporating Indigenous knowledge into the Waasigan project, such as field studies or selection of the preferred route, and especially the EA report, considering that some information might be sensitive or confidential? Just wondering if there's any insights that you could share from your experience. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question that could probably be an hour on its own in terms of a response. I think early on in the process, one thing that we were really trying to think about where we can is trying not to follow previous processes where you can put traditional or Indigenous knowledge into one section, and that's where it lives and that's where it's assessed. So we did try to find opportunities to, where appropriate, incorporate that information in, other areas, of the impact statement. And it depends on, working with the individual communities, because they're going to have different perspectives in terms of how they want to, see their information, incorporated. I think the key part too about the Waasigan project is, Allison noted about considering Indigenous knowledge at any stage. I think it's really critical because, as we know, just when you get that information, it can really vary from community by community, and it's really important information that you don't want to kind of discount at later stages. So recognizing that you have kind of a staged process, especially when it comes to decision making. So, finding opportunities to represent kind of the Indigenous perspective, early in the stages, like with route selection. We made sure that for kind of our alternative means process, we had, you kind of have your typical, natural environment, socioec, and technical and cost, but seeing kind of more recently, right, there's that push to also have kind of that separate Indigenous theme or lens. So we made sure that we had that available, and just kind of develop based off of, the information that we had, engaging with the communities to, okay, this is how we're going to go about this, process to kind of make this, make this decision, and then continuing to kind of work through with them. But just recognizing that, it's going to be a continued process. Another thing that I think was really important too is the EA had a commitment related to a traditional land and resource use plan. So, it's in kind of the EA, right? It is difficult to get into, considerable site-specific detail because it's so sensitive, it's so protected. But we were able to, acknowledge that, there are values that exist, there are values that need to be protected, and we need to be able to kind of work with the communities to identify what those ultimately look like. And I think that was one of the benefits too of, just because we talk about, trust and buy-in, being able to commit to developing that more kind of detailed plan and, kind of alongside the EA process, collaboratively with the Indigenous communities, I think is really important, because it is something that needs to be taken very seriously, and new information can come to light, at any time, and we need to be able to kind of adapt to that. But yeah, I think it gets to that. It's not a one size fits all. Being careful to make sure that you are taking into account the individual community kind of perspectives, recognizing that you are going through a regulatory process that is designed quite often, right, with that Western science approach. So being open and flexible, we tried to find ways to, even if it wasn't Indigenous knowledge, but, areas of concern, like we heard about like GBA plus, is an area of interest. It's not required for provincial environmental assessments, so we didn't necessarily go that full length of incorporating it, but we found ways to weave some stuff in, and tried to look at it very carefully, in relation to construction camps. So there's different ways that you can kind of pull it in, but it's working very closely, and being able to leverage those close relationships that you have, where like the number of times we've had just informal discussions, right, of does this look right? Does this make sense? And there's give and take on both sides, which is really important because understanding kind of different perspectives and just being able to come to the table with that.
Just maybe to add, I mean, Waasigan's a $1.2 billion project. It's the largest project in Hydro One's history. So be flexible and learn quickly. Where we started is not where we ended. I think Allison will acknowledge that. It's a recognizing, I think that we all recognize this in the room, that no project is the same. You may do a project in the south and what worked there, what worked with Indigenous communities, what the perspective of Indigenous communities. You have to come in with an open mind, flexibility, innovative, and listening. Investing early with big ears, and being willing to adapt and create new processes that work for the needs of that project. So I think another thing, like when we ended up making that progress and really getting to a place of increased trust, things like early access to chapters of the EA. So for pre and early review, we're not giving project partners or Indigenous communities the timelines that the ministry puts out there, right? The ministry sets up, like Callum said, processes in place. We don't need to necessarily follow those processes. We can do better in many cases for things that work for that project. On the culturally sensitive issues where there's confidentiality, indicating that early to the regulator, to the contractor eventually. There's going to be things that you're not going to maybe have access to, that the communities are not comfortable with. We've signed agreements, we're protecting that, and those are conversations that can be had throughout the process. So lots to consider there.
Question over here.
It's not really a question, more of like a statement to, first of all, I want to share that we're available here too as Indigenous participants. I'm part of the Moose Cree First Nation, and we're talking about Indigenous-led projects and Indigenous perspectives. What's right for one First Nation is not always going to be right for, there's the best practice, right? Best practice, we always hear that. But what's right is the right thing to do, right? And that's how we, as Indigenous people, think. What's right for my First Nation is not going to be right for the Mississauga in this territory. So, I'll share this story. There was this group of people. They wanted to build a ski resort, right? And so they went through the EA, right? Went through everything, and this was way back. I wish I knew that place. But for the first 5 years, they were wondering, we're not getting any snow. So they went to the local First Nations people, and they were saying, where is that place? Which mountain? And then they told them where it was. And then the First Nations people, this is over in Quebec, and they had this Indigenous name, word for it. Translated into English, the mountain that never snows. And so they would have saved millions of dollars if they, there's a saying about the right way is the Indigenous way. We think of community first. We think of, we're values-based people, peoples. So our values shape our beliefs, which shapes our spirit, our attitudes. We talked about that, we call it the fourth dimension, that spirit. And so I'm here if you want to talk to me about, how would you go about collaborating with Indigenous communities. I've done research as well. I did my master's at Trent. I used to be a professor at Trent. And I think that within the, Indigenous perspectives, it's very hard to explain. It's more of like a story. It's more of like a sharing of knowledge, right? And it's ingrained in our culture. That's the big thing. And our language is ingrained. Our culture and language go together. You know, we are. Somebody talked about action-based words. You know, and our culture, our language is action-based. You know, it's verb-based. Everything that we do is for the betterment. When we think of learning, for example, we never tell each other that you were wrong in this process. You know, and this is what we're all about here, is you could have made a better choice, is our perspective. And somebody said, we only know what we know. I forget how she put it. And it goes with non-Indigenous people too. Like, we only know what we know. And when you come into our communities and our territories, you know, we're not sure what you're doing. So we're gonna be like, what is that? I don't know. You know, it's not until you gain that level of trust, what you were talking about, that we can start to build those relationships. That's what it's all about, relating with one another. I do this whole presentation in what I do. I'm the founder of my company. It's called the Indigenous Men's Alliance. It's where we align ourselves with our values. And I think that coming here, you know, it's very important that we remember our values, you know, the truth and being honest. Honesty is our most important value. We agree that a lot of companies are not very honest in what they do when it comes to environment. And so that honesty is our most important value. It's what grounds us as First Nations people, as all peoples, I guess. And I just want to share that, you know, we're here, we're available if you want to talk to us. Miigwech.
I think being mindful of time, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you again so much, John, Callum, and Fiza, for your great presentations.
Okay, I'm not going to keep everyone long, but I did just want to come up and say a huge, big thank you to all of our presenters, all of our moderators, all the audience participation. Not only were the presentations phenomenal, the presenters were amazing, but the audience participation and that knowledge sharing coming from the audience, as well as starting those conversations, was something really amazing to see. And so I hope we can continue that into the evening social and have those dialogues continue tonight and also into tomorrow. I also want to thank the Old Mill and their staff for hosting the wonderful food and the wonderful staff that we've seen today. I also want to extend a huge thank you to the Conference Planning Committee. So I guess I didn't introduce myself. For those who don't know me, I'm Violetta Savage. I'm a board member for OAIA, as well as this year's conference chair. And I have to say, if these people are still here, if you guys can all please stand up, and a round of applause. These are the people who have kept me sane and made this process really fun throughout as well. So can the committee please stand up? I also want to put a plug in for our annual general meeting. Please save the date, December 4th at 5 p.m. The AGM will be virtual, and we'll be sending out an email shortly with all that information. Lastly, if you are leaving us today and not coming to tomorrow, please, please, please scan this QR code and fill out the survey. We really do read all those comments and take them to heart, and it helps us plan next year's conference just to make it better for everyone involved. Yep, so please scan that. A note on sustainability. If you aren't coming tomorrow as well, can you just drop off your name tag so we can continue to use these? Less landfill. If you are coming tomorrow, please bring your name tag. Also, if you are playing bingo throughout, we can continue playing throughout the social. Just find myself or Beth and hand in your completed bingo card, and then we'll do a random draw to win a 2025 OAI membership. So with that, we're going to move into our evening social, cash bar, complimentary appetizers, and for those that are leaving, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it, and get home safely. Thank you.